Hampton County 911, where's your emergency?
This is Alec Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to ambulance immediately. My wife and child just got badly.
Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Brit.
And the story I have for you today is one that you have probably heard something about. A powerful low country dynasty, a double murder, and a trial that gripped the country. And a system that let one family operate above the law for nearly a century. And with the possibility of a new trial on the horizon, one question is more important now than ever. Why? Why would a man who seemed to have everything choose to destroy it all by murdering his own wife and son? This is the story of the Murdaugh family.
47 Moselle Road in Allison.
Sir?
You said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road.
Stay on the line with me,
Please
okay?
hurry.
Yes, sir. Stay on the line with me, okay?
Road, I've been up to it now. It's bad.
Okay. How did they shoot? Did they shoot themselves?
Oh, no. Hell no.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am. I can tell that.
And did
I
you
can
see
tell that
anyone?
he shot in the head, and he shot really bad.
Okay, where is he shot at?
Ma'am, I don't know, but there's blood everywhere. I can see his brain. Face down. I tried to turn her a little bit, but she's got a hole in her head. Please hurry.
Those are just excerpts from the nearly 10-minute call Alec Murdaugh made to 911 on June 7, 2021 at 10:07 p.m. Between sobs, he tells dispatch that he had just discovered the bodies of his wife and son near some dog kennels on his estate in rural Colleton County, South Carolina. And rural is for real, because even speeding with lights and sirens on, it takes South Carolina law enforcement about 20 minutes to get out to Moselle Road. Now, when they finally turn up the long driveway to get to the dog kennels, the first thing they see is Alec standing by his truck with his hazard lights flashing. And leaning against his truck is his 12-gauge shotgun, which Alec says that he got from his house in case whoever hurt his wife and son decided to come back. Now, officers immediately take the gun, they secure it in their patrol car, and make their way to the kennels to see for themselves what Alec described on the phone. His 22-year-old son, Paul, is lying face down in the open doorway to a feed room that's at the end of this row of dog kennels. He has traumatic chest and head wounds, and police note, as Alec told the dispatcher, that the majority of Paul's brain is actually lying next to him on the ground. Everything they're seeing is consistent with a gunshot wound. Now, first responders also find Paul's iPhone laying on top of his body, just resting on top of his shorts, kind of like it was placed there. And there's no blood on it or anything. But Alec did tell the 911 dispatcher that he had touched both of the bodies to try and see if they were breathing. So the positions that they're found in might not have been the positions that the killer left them in or that they naturally fell in. I mean, Alec actually said to the operator that he tried to turn his 52-year-old wife, Margaret, who goes by Maggie, he tried to turn her over a little bit too, but she had a hole in her head. And first responders see what looks like 5 gunshot wounds to her back, her chest, wrist, and leg.
And is Maggie right there next to Paul?
No, she's actually about 30 feet away, across this gravel driveway. But there is this clear line of sight between the two victims. There are also 12-gauge shell casings and 300 blackout casings next to the bodies and strewn along the gravel driveway between them. So it's definitely looking like both victims were shot. But what's weird is that it seems like those 2 casings would have been fired from 2 different guns, a shotgun and a semi-automatic rifle. And neither of those weapons were left behind.
And what about the gun that Alec had with him when they showed up? That was a shotgun, right?
It was a 12-gauge shotgun, too, but it actually wasn't the one used to kill Maggie or Paul. Investigators eventually are going to take it into evidence, but right now, they're more focused on hearing from Alec. Their first interview with him actually happens in one of the officers' cars. And again, between sobs and dry heaving, Alec walks them through the events of that night. And here is some of that 34-minute interview.
So, just start at the top, take your time.
Like when I came back here, I mean, I pulled up and I could see him, and, you know, I knew something was bad. I ran out. I knew it was really bad. My boy over there, I could see it was. And I ran over to Maggie, and actually, I think I tried to turn Paul over first. You know, I tried to turn him over, and I don't know, I figured it out. His cell phone popped out of his pocket. I started to try to do something with it, thinking maybe, but then I put it back down really quickly. Then I went to my wife, and I mean, I could see.
Did you touch Maggie at all?
I did. I touched them both.
Okay.
I tried to take, I tried to do it as limited as possible, but I tried to take their pulse on both of them. And, you know, I called 911 pretty much right away, and she was very good.
I know you said the phone fell out the pocket, but did you see anything else that didn't belong or shouldn't belong or that wasn't part of Paul?
No, sir, not the, no, sir.
How about Maggie?
No, sir.
You didn't see anything around them? What made you come out here tonight?
I went to, my mom's a late stage Alzheimer's patient. My dad's in the hospital. My mom gets anxious when she does. I went to check on them, and Maggie's a dog lover, and she fools with the dogs. And I knew she'd gone to the kennel. I was at the house. I left the house and went to my mom's for just a little while. Tried to call her when I left. Texted her, no response. When I got back to the house was obviously nobody was in there, so I figured they're still up here fooling around. Paul was gonna be getting set up to plant. Our sunflower seeds got sprayed and died, and he was refiguring to plant the sunflower seeds. So I came back up here, and I drove up and saw and called.
The window of time from when Alec left to see his mom to when he came back is small, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m.-ish. The window for when Maggie and Paul were murdered is even smaller. The coroner estimates that was between 9 and 9:30. But Alec says that he didn't hear or see anything odd when he got home. In fact, he says he only went to the dog kennels because he was looking for Maggie, like he couldn't find her inside.
Had Maggie and Paul been arguing over anything?
No.
What was their relationship like?
Wonderful.
Wonderful. How about yours and Maggie's?
Wonderful. I mean, I'm sure we had little things here and there, but we had a wonderful marriage, wonderful relationship.
And yours and Paul's relationship?
As good as it could be.
Have y'all been having any problems out here? Trespassers? People breaking in?
None that I know of. The only thing what comes to my mind is my son Paul was in a boat wreck a couple years ago, and there's been he was charged with being arrested for being the driver. There's been a lot of negative publicity about that, and there's been a lot of people online, just really vile stuff. But when Paul's out and about, I mean, people routinely, I don't think I know the full story, because I don't think they give it to me, but I mean, he's been punched and hit and just attacked a lot. So you know, but I mean, nothing like this.
Alec is downplaying the situation here. The boat wreck he's talking about happened in 2019 and resulted in the death of a 19-year-old girl named Mallory Beach. And a couple months afterwards, Paul was charged with 3 felony counts of boating under the influence, which included causing Mallory's death and seriously injuring 2 other passengers. But the boat crash is just like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the Murdaugh family. I mean, Mallory's death, Paul and Maggie's deaths, they're not the only suspicious deaths that Alec and his family have been tangled up in.
Yeah, I remember when all of this was like dominating the news, the Murdaugh name was just being brought up with like one tragedy after another, it seemed like.
Right, and it's because like the Murdaughs, they're not just like any old Southern family. They were a huge name in South Carolina. I mean, for over a century, the Murdaugh name was basically synonymous with power and money. 3 generations of Murdaugh men served as the region's top prosecutors, overseeing every criminal case across 5 counties. According to an article published in The State, they sent thousands of people to prison and more than a dozen to death row. People seem to believe that they are untouchable. But beneath that polished surface, there are cracks, like big cracks. And with the deaths of Paul and Maggie, for the first time in nearly a century, they are about to split wide open. The media latches on to Paul and Maggie's deaths immediately, and the rumors and speculation are rampant. In the months that follow the incident, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division doesn't name any suspects or people of interest, but they also don't publicly clear anyone. And given the Murdaugh family history, people are quick to jump to their own conclusions. I mean, the first incident that starts getting a lot of airtime is that boat crash, the death of Mallory Beach. On February 23, 2019, she was ejected from Alec Murdaugh's boat after it crashed into a bridge at 2:21 in the morning. Now, there weren't any adults on the boat. It was just a group of teenagers with Alec's son, Paul, allegedly at the wheel. And while all of the other kids made it back to shore after the crash, Mallory didn't. Her body was found 8 days later in a marsh about 5 miles away from where the crash originally happened. Now, according to the coroner, Mallory drowned after suffering a blow to the head from impact. When officers got to the scene that night and started talking to all of the kids, it was clear that they had been drinking. A police report describes them as grossly intoxicated, and there was a cooler full of beers and seltzers on the boat and a bunch of empty cans. But no one was breathalyzed at the scene.
Which, I always get hung up on that part. Like, why not at least breathalyze Paul, like if he was the one driving?
So that's the thing. At least on paper, officers couldn't confirm who was driving, even though the passengers on the boat were all pointing fingers at Paul. And according to one of the passengers that night, while everyone was focused on Mallory, Paul's main concern seemed to be getting in touch with his grandfather, Randolph Murdaugh, who was the former South Carolina Circuit Solicitor. In an audio recording taken that night by first responders, you can hear one of the kids, Mallory's boyfriend in particular, shouting at Paul during his conversation with an officer.
Bro, you just smiling like it's funny. My girlfriend gone, bro. You all know Alec Murdaugh?
Oh, yeah, I know his name.
That's his son.
That's so driving the boat.
Good luck.
I feel like there's so much behind that good luck.
Yeah, so Mandy Matney, the investigative journalist who covered this boat crash and went on to deep dive into the Murdaugh family and break a lot of the news surrounding Maggie and Paul's deaths, she told our reporters that immediately following the crash, she started getting tips from people saying that there was going to be a cover-up. She kept hearing that the alleged boat driver belonged to a powerful family of lawyers that, quote, got away with everything and did not believe that anybody could touch them.
Which seems like it was the case if all the kids from the crash were telling the officers that Paul was driving the boat, and the officers were, like you said, on paper, writing that no one really knew who was driving the boat.
Right, and I get it to some extent. This was a chaotic scene.
Yeah.
The kids aren't necessarily of sound mind, but it is hard to shake the idea that maybe Paul might have been getting some favorable treatment because of his last name. I mean, Mandy actually said that when she began reporting on this boat crash story, people were scared to talk to her or even say the name Murdaugh out of fear of the family's power. And the family's power was in full force that night. When the kids were taken to the hospital, Paul's dad and grandfather were there waiting. They were walking through the ER trying to talk to all of the kids while they were talking with officers, trying to prevent them from taking those sobriety tests, and eventually stopping all police interviews.
Is that even allowed?
Well, I mean, they're all lawyers. So if they were their lawyers, but according to AP News, one nurse did actually tell Alec Murdaugh to stay in Paul's room or leave the hospital. And she asked security to keep an eye on him. Now, eventually, over an hour after the crash, Paul's blood was taken at the hospital. And even then, his BAC was more than 3 times the legal limit. But at least at that time, no charges were filed. Over the next month, authorities continued their investigation into Mallory's death. Her mom filed a civil lawsuit over it, accusing 3 Murdaugh men of wrongdoing. And ultimately, the county sheriff's office ended up recusing itself from the investigation due to their, quote, long-standing relationship with Randolph Murdaugh. So that's when the case got handed over to the Department of Natural Resources. And within a matter of weeks of them having it, they end up charging Paul with boating under the influence, resulting in Mallory's death. Paul pleaded not guilty at his arraignment, which 2 judges recused themselves from, by the way, because of the Murdaugh family. But here's the thing. He is murdered before the trial can take place. And 2 months after his murder, all charges get dismissed in what officials describe as a formality.
So all of that is a pretty far cry from how Alec was talking about this incident to the cops the night of Paul's murder.
Right. And because Alec isn't just some guy talking to police. He is used to dealing with law enforcement, used to dealing with judges, the whole system. He knows the right things to say. He knows the right way to position himself to make sure things get handled quietly. And the boat crash wasn't even the first time the Murdaughs had inserted themselves legally into the case of a dead teenager in the area. I'm going to take one more detour to give everyone background before we come back to Maggie and Paul, because this is important to know. So 6 years before the murders of Maggie and Paul, a 19-year-old named Stephen Smith was killed. And from the jump, his death was suspicious as hell.
Yeah, full disclosure, this is the case that I have the most questions about.
I think it's the one that most people have the most questions about, because none of the facts seem to be matter of fact. So on July 8th, 2015, around 4 o'clock in the morning, Stephen's body is found in the middle of a road 10 to 15 miles away from the Murdaugh home. Now, originally, investigators thought that he had been shot. I mean, I've seen some of the photos from the road that day, and it is gruesome. But at autopsy, it was determined that he died from blunt force trauma to the head resulting from a possible hit and run. I mean, his shoulder had been dislocated, but the thing to me that doesn't line up with a car crash is he had apparent defensive wounds on his hand.
Right, and you aren't fighting a car. How do you get a defensive wound from a hit and run?
You don't. And that's one of the reasons that the coroner and the pathologist and the detectives and Stephen's family all seem to have different ideas about how Stephen actually died. SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, they believe that Stephen was on his way home when he likely ran out of gas on the highway and decided to walk the rest of the way. His car is found with the gas cap unscrewed about 2 to 3 miles away from where he would have been killed. And to explain the severity of Stephen's head injury, the pathologist who performed the autopsy suggested Stephen had been hit by the mirror of a passing truck. But an investigator from Highway Patrol wrote in reports that there was no evidence of Stephen being struck by a vehicle. Things you would expect to see, right? No glass, no debris from a car found anywhere on the road or on Stephen's body. So the investigator asked the pathologist if it was possible that, could Stephen have actually been struck with a baseball bat? Now, she said no, but then he asked, okay, well, what if someone was driving by and swung the bat from a moving car? Because I think she's saying just a hit from a baseball bat wouldn't be this severe.
Right.
But what if they have the bat and it's in a moving car? And the pathologist said, quote, well, I guess that's possible. Now, the county coroner didn't buy the hit and run theory either. His theory was that Stephen was actually shot like they initially thought the first time. And Stephen's mom, Sandy, was adamant that her son's life did not end from a vehicle collision. Sandy has said that her son was skittish. He would not have been walking in the middle of the road. And even if for some reason he would have gotten off the road once he saw the headlights coming.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't think he ran out of gas either. She thinks it was a setup and that he was beaten to death. I mean, so severely, by the way, that part of Stephen's face had to be rebuilt with putty for his funeral.
So why does she think it was premeditated?
Well, Sandy tells SLED that Stephen was acting strange in the weeks leading up to his death. He was being more secretive, not studying as much, and playing hooky from school. So her theory is that his classmates who were coming home from a baseball game that night were responsible.
Hence the baseball bat theory.
Right. And in a letter Sandy wrote to the FBI, she mentions Alec Murdaugh's sons specifically. Now, Alec's oldest son, Buster, went to high school with Stephen. Buster is actually mentioned a couple of times throughout the Highway Patrol report, along with others that police were looking into. And I mean, we're talking about a small town in South Carolina that is far from the only connection between the Smiths and the Murdaughs. Alec Murdaugh coached the boys' Little League baseball team, and his brother Randy reportedly repped Stephen's dad in a workers' comp claim.
And wasn't there a rumor that Stephen and Buster were possibly in a relationship at some point? Like, is that just internet noise?
No, that rumor is actually in the police report. It is not verified or anything, just an early rumor that investigators were tipped off to. Stephen was out as gay and was in a relationship when he died, but people online have brought up the Stephen-Buster secret romance theory to suggest that silencing Stephen might have been a motive. And Buster has never even explicitly acknowledged the rumor. He said in a statement that he was not involved in Stephen's death and that all of the vicious rumors swirling about him were false. But what makes me double take is that a sexual assault kit was ordered in Stephen's death by a coroner without consulting investigators.
Which, is that normal for a supposed hit and run? Like, you're investigating as a hit and run?
One of the highway patrol officers who responded the night said that he had never seen anything like that done before in any traffic accidents that he was aware of. Mm-hmm. And the autopsy didn't know anything abnormal that would prompt a sexual assault kit. And what's so interesting is the coroner who performed it is no longer in office. And because the records have been sealed, I don't know the results of the kit, if there were any. I mean, it's not even clear they collected a kit. Was the kit actually tested? Now, because everyone seems to disagree on what really caused Stephen's death, we reached out to an Ohio-based forensic pathologist, Dr. Kent Harshberger, to get our own professional opinion. Full clarity, he did not work Stephen's case, but he agreed to look at the autopsy photos and tell us his thoughts. And according to Dr. Harshberger, the injuries don't look like a typical hit and run. The head trauma is forceful enough that Stephen had to have been struck by either a moving vehicle or something in motion, but not in a way that matched the usual patterns. It seems too much to just be a beating, and a bat likely would have left a different, he said, narrower wound. What stood out most to him, though, was the blood all pooling in one area. No sign of a second impact, which you would normally expect in a hit and run when the body, hits the ground.
Mm-hmm. There's two impacts.
Right.
The hit
and then the ground.
And then the ground.
Dr. Harshberger said that he would have ruled it blunt force trauma to the head and left the manner undetermined, not ruled it an accident with a car. But rulings aside, what really gives me pause is that Sandy claims that the day of her son's death, the first call she received was from authorities notifying her. But do you want to guess who the second call was from?
Alec Murdaugh?
Not Alec, but his brother, solicitor Randy Murdaugh. Sandy says that he told her he was interested in working pro bono as a liaison between her family and the authorities. Stephen's dad accepted, though neither he nor Sandy had any idea how Randy found out about the incident so quickly or why he would have been interested in it specifically. And shortly thereafter, Randy just stopped returning their calls. So, by June 7th, 2021, when Alec is sitting in the patrol car talking to officers, he's telling them about the Mallory Beach incident.
Kind of.
Yeah, way underplayed. But there is all this stuff just bubbling under the surface. So once Maggie and Paul are killed, every suspicion anyone's ever had, any rumor that they've heard about this family, they're all getting spoken about louder and more often than ever before. I mean, this is all anyone is talking about in this area at the time. Now, I don't know what police think of Alec's story early on, but they don't arrest him that night. Per some redacted police reports I have, it doesn't even seem like he's even the first suspect. A kid named Rogan Gibson is. And Rogan is like a third son to the Murdaughs. And the night of the murders, Paul had actually been dog sitting for him. That was likely why he was out in the kennels that night to begin with. And they know that Rogan was the last person Paul talked to. But when they interview him the next day, they end up quickly ruling him out. It turns out Paul had called Rogan at 8:40 p.m. to tell him that something was wrong with his dog's tail. The pair tried to FaceTime, but Paul had a bad connection. They ended up disconnecting. And then after that, Rogan tried texting and calling Paul, tried texting Maggie to get Paul to call him back, even tried Buster, but no one was answering. So this FaceTime call and the logs proved that Rogan was telling the truth. But all the stuff they get from the phone also proved that someone else was lying. Alec. There is a 50-second cell phone video that Paul took via Snapchat at 8:44 p.m. on the night of his murder. And the video, taken at the dog kennels, shows Paul petting Rogan's dog. But it isn't the visuals that investigators are interested in, it's the audio, because in the background, you can hear Paul's voice talking to Rogan's dog. You hear Maggie's voice shouting that an off-camera dog named Bubba has a bird in his mouth. But then there's a third voice, Alex.
Get back, get back. Quick, Cash. Come on. Quick. That's okay. Come here. It's not bad. Come here, Cash. Shit. Come here. Post it. Cash.
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth. Bubba.
Hey, Bubba.
That's a guinea.
This is a chicken.
Come here, Bubba.
Come here, Cash.
Come here, Bubba.
Cash. Quick.
You can hear him trying to get Bubba's attention to drop the bird.
So this video basically says that Alec was at the crime scene right before the murders.
And he lied to police about it. Originally, he said that the last time he spoke to Maggie was around 8 or 8:30 p.m. that night, after which he lay down for a quick nap. Then just after 9 o'clock, he woke up, left to go visit his mom. So in his version of events, he never stopped by the dog kennels that night or saw Maggie or saw Paul before leaving. Him leaving just after 9, though, which was always his story, doesn't seem to be a lie. The telemetry data from his car shows that he left the Moselle property at 9:07 p.m.
So he would have been there during the 9 to 9:30 window that Maggie and Paul were presumably murdered. At least a small portion of that.
Yeah, and there's the fact that Alec practically raced to his mom's house that night, driving faster than he had on any other trip that day. And that his car idled for a period of time halfway up the driveway at his mom's house. Perhaps, they suspect, when he was trying to conceal or stash the murder weapon.
So he did go to his mom's that night then?
Yeah, they think he went to establish an alibi, but he for sure went. And that is proven by his car's GPS data, which makes the evidence that they end up finding in his mother's house all the more suspicious, because there is this blue rain jacket in a closet of hers. And when tested, this jacket is found to have a large amount of gunshot residue on the inside of it. Now, it's probably sounding like all of this is happening fast, but keep in mind the Murdaugh of it all. I feel like hoops had to be jumped through, because this search of Mom's house, which seems like something you would search early on, knowing that's exactly where he went at the time of the murders.
Yeah, that's his supposed alibi.
That doesn't happen until 4 months after the murders. And I think it was only prompted by information from the woman who took care of Alec's mom's house. She said that she saw Alec carrying what looked like some sort of blue tarp under his arm to go into the house. And given the placement of the gunshot residue, SLED agents put forward that aside from shooting a gun while wearing the jacket inside out, the residue could have gotten there if the jacket was wrapped around the weapon that had recently been fired.
No, I thought that they never found the murder weapon, though.
They didn't. I mean, this is just circumstantial evidence, but it definitely doesn't do Alec any favors. And by month 4, when they're finding this, there is already so much more that they've learned to make Alec look suspicious. I mean, for starters, Everyone by now is talking about Mallory's case and Stephen's case. And Stephen's had so much that was like glaringly suspicious around it that it actually got reopened. Not officially tied to the Murdaughs, though, just reopened. But another case undeniably is being connected to the Murdaughs. It's the case of Gloria Satterfield. Her death, and specifically the aftermath of it, starts to raise a lot of eyebrows. Gloria had worked as a nanny and a housekeeper for the Murdaughs for over 20 years. I mean, she helped raise their kids, practically spent more time with them than her own family. I mean, Gloria's sister said in an interview with People magazine that she would have given Alec anything she had. So Gloria was 57 years old when she allegedly suffered a trip and fall accident at the Murdaugh home. According to the family, she tripped over their dogs and fell down the front steps of their house. Gloria got admitted to the hospital with severe head trauma, and just over 3 weeks later, she died from the injury. What's weird, though, is that the coroner wasn't notified about Gloria's death, nor was an autopsy performed. And on Gloria's death certificate, her manner of death is listed as natural, which is obviously not consistent even with a trip and fall accident.
Right, like Gloria didn't just happen to die of natural causes at the exact moment she tripped down the Murdaugh residence stairs.
Exactly. But with no autopsy or police involvement, there is just no way to know what happened or was anything about her death intentional. I mean, I can't find anything that might have motivated them to want her dead. But the weirdness doesn't even stop there. At Gloria's funeral, Alec apparently approached her sons and told them that they should file a wrongful death suit against him, or technically claim it against his home's insurance policy, which would be able to pay them compensation. And so her sons do, but they never hear anything. The whole thing just sort of fizzles away, which is catching a theme here.
Yeah.
So by fall, SLED seems to be focusing specifically on Alec, and they expand their investigation into his finances, which uncovers some irregularities. It comes out that the very day that Paul and Maggie were shot to death, June 7th, the CFO of Alec's law firm confronted Alec about funds that seemed to be missing from the firm's settlements. Now, Alec tried to talk his way out of it, and then, of course, everyone became distracted by the slaying of his wife and son. But not forever. On September 3rd, the firm confronts Alec again after another employee discovers that instead of making sure settlement money went to the firm's clients, Alec was actually redirecting it into a personal account or accounts that he had set up to look like they belonged to the law firm and using the money himself. And he had been doing this for years, by the way. And this is where Gloria Satterfield comes back in. So remember, he tells the sons, you should file a claim against my insurance. They're like, okay, we're going to do it. They did it, never see a dime. Well, it turns out his home insurance did pay out $4.3 million, but the Satterfields never received a dime. Alec was the one who pocketed all of it. He and some associates diverted the money, and Gloria's kids were completely in the dark. And so now, after learning about the payout, they file a lawsuit against Alec and his associates. And also, SLED decides to open a criminal investigation into Gloria's death. They even get permission from her family to exhume her body so they can finally do an autopsy. So, I mean, the information is just avalanching at this point. But before anyone can dive fully into this twisted string or web or whatever you want to call it of deaths and fraud and forgery, on September 4th, 911 gets a call that turns everything on its head.
Hampton County 911, what's your emergency?
I got a flat tire, and I stopped, and somebody stopped to help me. And when I turned my back, they tried to shoot me.
Did they actually shoot you or they tried to shoot you?
They shot me.
Okay, wait, you need EMS?
Well, I mean, yes, I can't drive.
Okay.
And I'm bleeding a lot.
Where part of your body?
I'm not sure. Somewhere on my head.
Okay, and what's your name? I'm still here. I'm still on the line with you. What's your name?
Alex Murdaugh.
Alex Murdaugh?
Yes, ma'am.
Shortly after that call, Alec is airlifted to a hospital in Savannah, Georgia for treatment.
Airlifted? He sounded totally fine on the phone for someone who'd just been shot in the head.
So authorities say Murdaugh had a superficial head wound, though his attorney will later call it significant head trauma. I mean, there definitely was a lot of blood on him coming from his head, enough to have spilled into his car when he went to get his phone to call 911. And enough for somebody driving by to feel like they needed to pick him up from the side of the road and bring him to a nearby ambulance. So in my mind, like, it might be a protocol thing, like when you're dealing with a head injury like this, because, I mean, it turns out he did have a bullet wound to the back of his head, and he suffered a skull fracture and a brain bleed. He was hospitalized for 2 to 3 days, in which time he tells SLED agents that the man who pulled over to help him with like a flat tire he had, he's the one that did this, and he was driving a blue pickup truck. And he tries to give details to a sketch artist, but SLED never releases any images because they are apparently not satisfied with them. Like, they say at first Alec didn't have enough information about the driver's features.
And the rest of us online just didn't buy the story from the jump. I mean, it seems like this guy's MO is when he gets backed into a corner, a gun goes off.
It definitely felt fishy to me at the time. Now, after this, like within a couple of days, Alec releases a statement announcing his resignation from the law firm and that he'll be entering rehab for a 20-year opioid addiction, which has only gotten worse since the deaths of his wife and son. And he essentially uses the addiction to explain his financial misconduct. And his lawyer says that it was an enormously expensive habit and that he stole the money to fund that habit. So 2 days after that statement, Alec's law license is suspended indefinitely. And not even a week after that, some new details come out in this roadside shooting. Basically, Alec admits to police that this was staged. He said it was a staged suicide attempt. And he had asked a man named Curtis Smith to shoot him during a fake car breakdown in order to make his death look like murder because he believed it would help his surviving son Buster collect his $10 million life insurance payout. And for what it's worth, Mandy Matney believes that the insurance settlement thing is actually made up too.
Did he really mean to die, though?
I don't know. This is one of the things that I haven't seen a bunch of theories about, and Alec doesn't address it in his statement. But it's kind of like you said, like he's done so many things wrong at this point. Like maybe it's too much to handle. Maybe he felt like backed into a corner.
And okay, where does this Curtis guy fit into everything, though?
So Curtis, who doesn't go by Curtis, he goes by Eddie.
Okay.
He's this 61-year-old former client from like a workers' comp case, and like also apparently like a distant cousin of Alec's. So they find him on September 14th. He's arrested on charges of assisted suicide and assault and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, among others. But Eddie's version of things don't quite line up with what they heard from Alec. Eddie actually goes on the Today Show and says that he was not a willing accomplice in the whole scheme. He says, quote, "I didn't shoot him. If I had shot him, he'd be dead."
Fair enough.
He claims that he had a close relationship with Alec, but said that he thinks he was basically set up. He said he had no clue about the staged suicide plot. And in his telling, he didn't know why Alec asked him to even meet him on this like remote road in Hampton County. But he went anyways. And then he says Alec showed up with a gun, asked Eddie to shoot him. When Alec made a sudden movement, Eddie intervened. The gun went off. But Eddie says that when it went off, that bullet didn't hit Alec. And once he realized Alec was okay, he took the gun, drove off, and disposed of it.
So how does Alec end up with the bullet to the head if Eddie drove away with the gun?
Honestly, nothing about this incident adds up. It's Alec's word against Eddie's word. Alec's attorney says Eddie was basically Alec's primary drug dealer. Eddie's attorney says that's not true. Eddie said he just did like odd jobs for Alec and that they stayed friends after Alec represented him. I mean, it's reported some places that Alec hired Eddie to kill him. Other places say that Eddie shot Alec willingly without pay. I mean, there is so much conflicting information out there. It is almost impossible to pin down what exactly happened on the side of that county road. But one thing is clear. Alec has been committing financial crimes for years, and finally authorities are charging him for them. And they are not holding back.
But that's just for the financial crimes, right? Like, not for murder.
that eventually comes too. So according to NBC News, Alec first faces 84 criminal charges and 11 lawsuits by July 2022. We're talking fraud, money laundering, computer crimes, forgery, criminal conspiracy, narcotics offenses, conspiracy to purchase and distribute oxycodone. And honestly, like, none of these charges seem to be very shocking. And Alec will end up pleading guilty to a number of them eventually. Then, that same month, Alec is finally indicted by a grand jury for the double murder of his wife and son, Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. And he does not go down without a fight. Alec pleads not guilty to the murder charges, and a trial date is set for January 2023. Now, that trial has been covered extensively. It was one of the longest in South Carolina history, and according to Alec's lawyer, Dick Harpootlian, who we spoke to for this episode, people came from across the country to spectate. So I'm only going to walk everyone through, like, the highlights. The prosecution puts forward that Alec killed Maggie and Paul on the night of June 7th and then left to alibi himself at his mom's house. Their theory is that leading up to the murders, Alec feared that his financial crimes were on the verge of being exposed, basically, and that he saw no way out. So he draws up this scheme to protect himself by becoming the victim. Like, they think in his mind, if he could be seen in the eyes of the public as a grieving husband and a grieving father, maybe all that sympathy would drown out the growing suspicions about his fraud and his theft. Plus, he wouldn't get caught because the murders could be attributed to the threats that Paul had been getting at the time since Mallory Beach's boat crash in 2019, because he was getting a lot.
You know, with all the financial stuff in the mix, it really strikes me as kind of classic family annihilator situation, right? Like, Alec reached a point of desperation, saw no way out, and made like this incredibly violent decision in a distressed state.
And so many times with the family annihilator stuff, I see over and over, what it comes down to is not even so much like trying to not get caught for financial crimes. It's like this image of themselves they don't want.
Right.
Yeah.
And like you just said, like, not just the image of himself, but like painting himself as sympathetic even versus like distracting from a poor image.
And family annihilator, like, that is a phrase that the prosecution throws out repeatedly. But the defense counters that the case against Alec is entirely based on circumstantial evidence. They know his car left Moselle at 9:07, but it's impossible to say whether Maggie and Paul were alive or dead at 9:07. They also claim that law enforcement was biased against Alec from the beginning, deciding that he was guilty and then, they say, fabricating evidence. They say someone else committed the murders, if not multiple someones. And they point to some data from Alec and Maggie's phone suggesting that a person other than Alec was in possession of Maggie's phone after the murder.
Wait, did they find her phone?
They did. So remember, Paul's was like on top of him. Hers wasn't anywhere near her body. They actually had to track it down using the Find My iPhone feature on Buster's phone. So her phone is found on Moselle Road, just beyond the Murdaugh property.
Like, on the ground?
It sounds like it was tossed in the woods. But anyways, the defense uses the data from Alec's phone to argue that it couldn't have been him who tossed Maggie's phone. But, like, you have to remember, just because someone's phone is somewhere, it doesn't mean they're with the phone.
Right.
And there are some wild theories out there about why Alec might have even tossed Maggie's phone that honestly, like, I say they're wild, but like some of them kind of make sense. Like, one theory is that basically Alec, Maggie, and Paul all rode down to the kennels together in one of the family's golf carts, which wouldn't have recorded the trip.
Right.
Once they got there, Alec killed Paul and Maggie and then quickly jumped back in the golf cart to go back to the house. But here's the problem. Maggie had left her phone in the golf cart. So when Alec drove away,
he has it with him.
He accidentally took it with him, right? Investigators say that the phone data backs this up. Like, no steps are logged on Maggie's phone while she's at the kennels. And then it suddenly unlocks and changes orientation just as Alec or someone would have been handling it. And, you know, the theory goes, like, once Alec realized that he had Maggie's phone, he, like, panicked. He didn't have time to go back to the kennels because he needed to rush to his mom's house for an alibi. But he definitely couldn't go there with Maggie's phone still in his possession, so he just, like, tossed it into the woods.
And does anybody ever explore the possibility that Alec may have had an accomplice?
I mean, with regard to his financial crimes, definitely.
Right.
With the double murder, it seems like SLED really just hones in on him. Now, the defense, they present a two-shooter theory based mainly on the fact that there were two different guns that were used, but they obviously assert that neither of those two shooters was Alec.
Honestly, we're so deep into the story, I kind of forgot that there were two different guns that were used.
I know, and like, it's such an oddity in this case. And like, when you talk about the guns, like the other weird thing that I don't think I touched on is they did a bunch of crime scene analysis, and the angle of the shots fired also are weird to me. Like, they point to an assailant that was shorter than Alec. Alec is like 6'3", 6'4".
And is that like the analysis of all the shots, or just one, or just like some of them?
So what they think is, I think they believe that Paul was shot first. The initial shot to Paul's shoulder seemed more straight on. All of the others were like angled up.
I'm also just thinking, like, Alec was a trial lawyer, and we already know about one incident that he staged involving a gun. Like, he would have known that using two weapons would complicate a case against him in a courtroom. Like, two guns makes more sense with two people. He's only one person.
Yeah, and listen,
it makes things muddy.
Yeah, and muddy's usually, like, for a defense, good at trial. Yeah. Listen, there are so many theories out there about exactly how these shootings might have gone down. I mean, there's literally been videos of people online who have, like, literally rebuilt the dog kennels and acted out the shooting with dummies. And like, basically one of the other theories that they like play out explains the low angle shots by suggesting that Alec may have like fallen down from the recoil or like tripped after shooting once at Paul in the shoulder, which then would have even forced him to like take a second shot from the ground. So like, did he do it intentionally? Did he fall? Is there some other excuse? But basically, he's like, when he's like on the ground, that's when he like fires at Maggie. And they say there's a theory. That's why the angle doesn't make sense.
Okay, so if it's not Alec, then who, right? Like, who does the defense put forward? If I'm a juror and I'm supposed to believe Alec didn't do this, I kind of want to see an alternate theory, like someone else that we aren't looking at.
Yeah, so Dick Harpoolian, his lawyer, suggested in our interview with him that he suspects Eddie, that guy that was tangled up in Alec's like roadside shooting thing. Yeah. But even though he said that to us, like, Eddie was never put on the stand or called as a witness at this trial. Because again, like, you don't have to say, I know the jury wants it. You don't have to say who. You just have to provide reasonable doubt. And to provide that reasonable doubt, I mean, the defense points out that there was unknown DNA found under Maggie's fingernail and a brown hair in her hand that ostensibly had not been tested or explained. I mean, Alec had red hair. And these are two details that the internet has really run with. Some people say that the hair in Maggie's hand was her own, like maybe it got there when she was shot in the head. She was dirty blonde. So I don't know. I haven't seen it myself. Or they say, like, was it from one of the dogs? I, again, haven't seen it. How long was it? And then there's all these Reddit threads that pour over the DNA under her fingernails. Like, some attribute it to the fact they say Maggie went to the nail salon earlier that day, where other people would have obviously been like touching her hands. She also went to the doctor's office. I don't know. And honestly, the defense doesn't spend nearly as much time on either of those pieces of evidence as like I would have expected.
And yeah, this trial is just like such, not even a mess, just confusing. Like, what about the car data and the blue jacket and stuff? Like, how does the defense explain those things?
Not even the defense. Alec actually ended up taking the stand in his own defense to explain it himself. Oh, how could you? So in his testimony, he says, he's clear. He says, I didn't kill my wife. I didn't kill my son. He like breaks down multiple times in describing how he allegedly found them that night. I mean, he admits that he lied to law enforcement in early interviews, but claims that it was because he was on a massive amount of Oxycontin, which made him paranoid and distrustful of law enforcement. And he said that he was basically afraid that if he told investigators he was at the kennels that night, like the video they have of, or the video at 8:44 they have of his voice, he thought that they would immediately set their sights on him. And he's like, if they were looking at me as the suspect, that's going to distract them from finding like the real killer. Now, he explains that stopping in the driveway of his mom's house was because he was trying to grab his phone, which had like fallen in a crack between like the seat and the console. He says he doesn't remember bringing a blue anything there, knows nothing about the rain jacket, so he doesn't really explain it. He's just like non-factor. But in the end, like, it's not enough to convince a jury. Even Alec's lawyer, Dick, told us that while he believes Alec's story is credible in the context of a man that is, quote, lied and cheated and stolen millions and millions of dollars? Absolutely not, end quote. It takes the jury less than 3 hours to return a guilty verdict. On March 2nd, 2023, Alec was found responsible for the murders of Maggie and Paul and later sentenced to the maximum, which is 2 consecutive life sentences.
I think the one thing I'm still struggling with in this case is just the why. Like, to be clear, I feel really, really certain of Alec's guilt. But, like, why would he go so far as to kill his wife and son just to essentially distract people from his financial crimes? Like, is that really the only explanation we get out of this?
I know, every Family Annihilator case, I feel like this is where we end up.
Yeah.
We're like, really? This is why?
There are like a million other options that don't include killing your own family.
When we spoke to Mandy Matney, who, in my mind, she's like one of arguably like the deepest in the trenches of this case, she's like in the same boat. She says that the motive in this case is one of the most misunderstood parts of the story. She told our reporters that she believes Alec was in this sort of like downward spiral before he killed Maggie and Paul. And that we have to remember that he like grew up with this belief that because of his last name, he could just get away with anything. Now, I didn't mention this before because I didn't want to distract from the other cases I told you about, but just 3 days after Maggie and Paul were murdered, Alec's father, Randolph Murdaugh, died in his home. And I don't bring this up to suggest in any way that like Alec was involved in his father's death. Like Randolph died after a battle with cancer. But what Mandy suggested is that Alec was used to relying on his father to get him out of messes that he made. She said that Randolph was really the one who had the pull at police stations and with solicitors and judges. So maybe Alec believed that this mess was just another thing that he could get away with. And he had no way of knowing that his father wouldn't be around to help him anymore.
That safety net disappeared after he took these drastic actions.
Yeah, and maybe that's why like things continued to escalate, or we saw him like
scrambling,
making those like drastic moves. Now, did Alec really believe that he could get away with double murder? I don't know. But I also don't really have a better theory to give you. Like, no one does.
So, can I ask, like, what happened to Buster? I feel like he
don't really hear about him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's tried pretty hard to like keep just a low profile. Like from what I can tell, he seems to still be living in South Carolina. I know he was enrolled at the law school at the University of South Carolina, but by 2021, he'd actually been asked not to return, according to court records, citing plagiarism and low grades. Recorded phone calls that Alec made in prison to him show that he was like trying to pull any strings he could to get Buster back in. But in 2022, Buster's attorney stated that Buster had, quote, put his desire to go to law school on hold for now. Now, I know our reporter tried every number we could find online to contact him, and we even emailed his long-term girlfriend turned wife as of earlier this year for any kind of comment, but we never heard back. And all I know is that Buster maintains that his dad is innocent. And Alec also continues to maintain his innocence from protective custody at a maximum security prison in South Carolina. We sent him a letter and asked Dick to make sure that he got it, but we never heard anything back. And all the while, Alec's lawyers are still fighting to appeal his conviction. They also pushed for a new trial alleging jury tampering. Now, a judge denied that motion back in January of 2024 after an evidentiary hearing, but Alec's team didn't stop there. In August of 2024, they elevated the issue to the South Carolina Supreme Court. Oral arguments are pending. And until then, Alec will remain in his 8x10 single-cell unit. According to Dick, he's now sober, busy with prison jobs, and, of course, still poring over his own defense. Still strategizing. Still looking for a way out. Now, Mandy Matney ended up writing a book on this case called Blood on Their Hands, Murder, Corruption, and the Fall of the Murdaugh Dynasty. And her work has been optioned into a dramatized limited series that's about to come out. So I don't think that this is the last we'll be hearing about the Murdaughs. In 2023, South Carolina law enforcement officially declared Stephen Smith's death a homicide rather than a traffic accident. But still, it's never been fully explained, and no one has ever been arrested in connection with it. And we reached out to SLED for more information about Stephen's case, but they declined to comment, saying that it is an ongoing investigation. So if you know anything about his roadside death in July of 2015, please come forward. Mallory's family was able to settle a lawsuit with one of the places that served Paul that night, and with Maggie's estate and Buster, whose ID Paul used to buy the alcohol. But no one has ever been put behind bars. And as far as I can tell, Gloria Satterfield's body was never actually exhumed. The criminal investigation into her death is ongoing. You can find all the source material for this episode on our website, crimejunkie.com. And if you want to listen to more episodes like this and all of our episodes completely ad-free, be sure to join our fan club. You'll also get early access to new episodes every week and episodes that we've never released here.
And you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Junkie Podcast.
We'll be back next week with a brand new episode.
Exact size Brittany wore, which no one in his household claimed, though the evidence had been washed, rendering the biological testing inconclusive. 8 months later, his former girlfriend went to the police because her conscience could no longer take it. She revealed that when he picked her up that afternoon, he smelled intensely of her own specific body wash, a shea butter soap that he had no access to at his own residence. And when she asked if he had showered at her family's house, he met her with a chilling, stone-cold silence. He also complained that he was never allowed to stay the night at the house while Brittany was revealing a petty, deep-seated resentment, a bruised ego that may have sparked his final, monstrous decision. For years, the case grew cold, leaving a family shattered, forced to live through endless milestones with nothing but an empty chair where a beautiful daughter should have been. A new sheriff named Kelly Cole and a captain named Mike Chilson took over the case years later, recognizing the terrifying pattern of this predator. In the year 2022, Chad Carr was finally arrested for capital murder. When the handcuffs slapped against his wrists, he did not even look surprised. He immediately began changing his story, telling a Texas Ranger that he had actually been in and out of that house all the time, trying to create an innocent explanation for any lingering biological evidence before we even brought it up. My, the guilty are so predictable. Yet, the tragedy did not end there. A grand jury reviewed the case for 90 days and returned a no bill, meaning he would not face trial. Reportedly because key testimony from the lead investigators was never even presented to them. Chad Carr walked out those doors a free man. But double jeopardy does not apply to a grand jury indictment. The investigators are still fighting, still analyzing an unidentified genetic profile recovered from that shower drain that does not belong to anyone who lived in that house. This case is not over. The silence of that small town will not win. If you have any information, if you know the truth that can finally bring justice to the memory of Brittany McGlone, you need to do the right thing. You can contact the Wood County Crime Stoppers anonymously at 903-760-1008 or call the Wood County Sheriff's Office directly at 903-763-2201. Do not let a monster sleep peacefully while an innocent girl rests in a premature grave. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for reasons so absurd, so trivial, that they would make a rational person weep. You look at a case like this and you ask yourself, how does a life full of promise, full of dreams like nursing school, and in a cold, silent bedroom? My, the world is a dark place when you pull back the curtain, and I tell you, some of the shadows hiding in these small towns are longer and deeper than you would ever care to. Imagine, we are talking about Winnsboro, Texas, a place where everyone thinks they know everyone. You know the type. You walk into the grocery store, and you can practically hear the whispers bouncing off the walls before you even reach the checkout line. Brittany McGlone was 19 years old. She was a young woman working 2 jobs, trying to build a future, trying to save every penny for her education. She had a routine. But on that 4th of May, 2007, she broke that routine. She stayed at her boyfriend's house. And that choice, that single, solitary deviation from her path, placed her in the direct line of a monster. When we talk about murder, we are often talking about a profound failure of humanity. We found her in a bed where she should have been safe, where she should have been sleeping off a long overnight shift. Instead, she was gone, taken by someone who felt entitled to her life, someone who, after committing an act of unspeakable brutality, felt comfortable enough to stop and take a shower. You have to be kidding me. Who does that? A person who kills and then washes the evidence off their skin in the victim's own home is not just a criminal. They are someone who views themselves as untouchable. They operate with a cold, calculated arrogance. The investigation, as you might expect in a tight-knit community, was a mess of shifting loyalties and half-truths. You have the boyfriend, Jeff, who claims he was off running errands with his stepfather. Then you have the grandfather, a man with a dark history of his own, who seemed to be lurking in the periphery of Brittany's life. A man whose secrets were big enough to kill for. But then you have the shadow that stays, Chad Carr, a man who, when you look at his history, seems to have a recurring appetite for violence against women. I have spent my life staring into the eyes of men who claim they did not do it, men who think they are smarter than the badge. Chad Carr was a man who lived in the cracks, a man who, by all accounts, had no business being near that house. Yet all evidence of his timeline and his behavior suggested a desperate, trembling guilt. When you look at the psychological profile, it is textbook. You have a man who has assaulted women in the past with tools, with iron, with the very same kind of violence that silenced Brittany. You have the failed polygraph, which, while not perfect, is a damn good indicator that the conscience is heavy. And the fact that he was seen acting erratically, shaking, trying to rewrite his own history to the police, it tells you everything you need to know. The tragic reality here is that the justice system, for all its grand juries and legal procedures, is not always the swift instrument of truth we want it to be. They had him. They had the patterns. They had the motive. They had the stench of his past actions trailing behind him like a funeral shroud. And yet, the gears ground to a halt. Families are left to pick up the pieces, to look at a billboard on the side of a road, begging for the truth that should have been served years ago. It is a tragedy, a profound and sickening tragedy. Brittany deserved a future. She deserved to graduate. She deserved to grow old. Instead, she is a name on a file, and a haunting question in the heart of a town that still has not found the courage to fully face. The monster in its midst. You have to wonder, in the end, if the truth is really hidden, or if people are just tired of looking at what is right in front of them. It is a dark, cold business, and I tell you, it never gets any easier to stomach. Human beings are curious creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you could possibly imagine. I have spent my life staring into the abyss of the human heart, and I tell you, it is a dark and cold place. You have to be kidding me, but we are talking about the kind of evil that hides in plain sight, in a town where everyone claims to know everyone. The story of Brittany McGlone is a tragedy written in the small, suffocating confines of Winnsboro, Texas. On the 4th of May, 2007, a 19-year-old girl is found dead in her boyfriend's bed. This is not a crime of happenstance. This is a crime of intent. The scene is a nightmare. There is blood on the sheets, blood on the pillows, and cast-off patterns on the wall that tell me someone struck her over and over with something. Heavy, likely a tire iron or a crowbar. That weapon? Gone. The room was pristine, save for the violence. Yet in the bathroom, someone had taken the time to wash themselves. That is not the behavior of a stranger. That is the behavior of someone who felt right at home while she lay dying. I have seen my share of killers. They are rarely geniuses. They are often arrogant, sloppy, and prone to thinking they're the smartest man in the room. Jeff Stogner, the boyfriend, had a lot of eyes on him. The mother did not like him. The family was estranged. and the timing of the discovery was, to put it mildly, convenient. But logic is a cold master, and the logic of their alibi, the trip to get the grandmother, held up under scrutiny. You see, when the facts line up, you have to follow them, even if you do not like the direction they point. Then there is the grandfather, James McGlone, a man hiding a dark, rotting secret. Brittany had confided in her sister that he had been abusing her for years. That is a motive as old as time, the fear of exposure, the desire to silence a witness. But again, the clock does not lie. Time cards place him at work during the murder. He was a monster, yes, but not the killer in this specific tragedy. Then, out of the shadows, steps a man nobody wanted to talk about, Chad Carr, a man whose life is a tapestry of violence and failed excuses. He was 25 years old, dating a teenager, and hanging around the periphery of the family. He knew about the hidden money, he knew the house was empty, and he had a history. A brutal assault in 2001 using the exact same weapon we suspect in. This case, do you see the pattern? It is written in blood. The police work here. It makes me want to pull my hair out. They had polygraphs. They had statements. They had a suspect who smelled a body wash that did not belong in that house. And they had a past that screamed of a predator. But the legal system? It is a slow, grinding machine. They had a search warrant weeks late. The evidence was washed, and the grand jury, well, they never heard the full story. A no bill, they called it. The man walked free. You look at Chad Carr and you wonder, what is behind those eyes? He never once gave a flat-out denial of the murder. He danced around it. He spoke of DNA as if he were negotiating a contract. It is a pathetic attempt to outsmart the truth. The investigators today, they know what they have in the shower drain. They know the secrets that are being kept in that small, tight circle. Brittany McGlone was 19. She was saving for nursing school. She had a life that was stolen by someone who thought they could clean the blood off their hands and simply walk away. You can wash your skin, you can wash your clothes, but you cannot wash the stain of an act like this from your soul. I have walked the halls of justice for many years, and I tell you this. The truth has a funny way of waiting. It stays in the shadows. It gathers its strength, and eventually it steps into the light. Someone out there knows. Someone in that circle is tired of holding the secret, and when they finally speak, the walls of that small, closed town will come crashing down. That is how this business works. That is the only way it works. My. You see, people often ask me how I can do this job for so many years and still sleep at night. The answer is simple. I do not look for the monsters under the bed. I look for the men who put them there. Human beings are strange creatures. They lie to themselves, they lie to their families, and they lie to people like me. But the truth is a stubborn thing. It does not care about your alibi, your excuses, or how well you think you have cleaned up your mess. It sits there, waiting in the silence, until someone like me comes along to drag it out into the light. And let me tell you, this case in Winsboro, Texas, it is one of those that just makes you shake your head and wonder about the darkness that can hide in a small town. Brittany McGlone was 19 years old. She was working 2 jobs, trying to save money for nursing school. A young woman with a future, snuffed out in a room where she thought she was safe. I have seen this 1,000 times. A routine is broken, a door is left unlocked, or someone who knows the layout of your life decides that your life is something they can simply take. She was found in her boyfriend's bed, and the scene was a nightmare. Blood on the walls, a pattern of repeated strikes. No weapon, of course. Monsters are rarely kind enough to leave the weapon behind. And the fact that the shower had been used, that is cold, that is calculated. That is the act of a man who, after committing a savage, hateful act, felt the need to wash the evidence from his own skin before walking back out into the world. You have to be kidding me. When you investigate a case like this, you start with the circle, the people who knew, the people who were close. The boyfriend, Jeff, he became the focus. as he should have. But the investigation keeps bumping into walls. Alibis that hold up just enough. Witnesses who remember just enough. And that uncomfortable feeling that the killer was someone who knew the house, knew the routine, and knew how to move through that small, quiet space without making a sound. And then there is the grandfather, a man who was accused of terrible things, a man who haunted the victim's life. But time cards do not lie, and the law has to follow the evidence. No matter how much your gut tells you that you are looking at a man capable of evil. Then you have Chad Carr. My. When you look at his history, you do not see a series of unfortunate events. You see a pattern. A man who attacked a woman years earlier with a tool that matches the description of the weapon used. Against Brittany, a man who has been accused of violence against those closest to him. He was at the scene, or near enough that it should have set off every alarm bell in the county. He fails a polygraph. He changes his story. And he acts like a man who is waiting for the inevitable. The fact that the legal system failed to bring this to a jury in the early stages, that it took 15 years for the wheels of justice to even attempt to turn, is a tragedy. You want to talk about the inner lives of these people? Brittany was a woman who wanted more from life than what her surroundings offered. She had secrets she was finally starting to whisper, and perhaps that was her death sentence. And Chad? A man who appears to have lived his life in the shadows of his own aggressive impulses. A man who never quite learned how to exist without leaving a trail of wreckage behind him. It is a story of a life stolen, a family left waiting, and a truth that remains just out of reach. I tell you, this world is full of people who think they can outrun their own shadows. They can run. They can hide. They can wash their hands in the shower until the water runs cold. But they never stop running, and eventually the truth catches up to them. It always does. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most trivial reasons imaginable. You have to be kidding me. I have spent my life looking into the eyes of men who think they are the smartest person in the room, only to find they are nothing more than cowards with a temper and a desperate need to control. My. Let us talk about Winsboro, Texas. A small town where everybody thinks they know everybody else. But I tell you, a town is only as honest as its darkest secret. In May of 2007, a 19-year-old girl named Brittany McGlone was found dead in her boyfriend's bed. Not at her own home, not where her routine dictated she should be, but in a place she only visited because she was trying to build a life with a boy named Jeff. When I look at this case, I see a void where a soul should be. The crime scene was a disaster, a brutal, intimate assault. Whoever did this was not in a hurry. They were comfortable. They walked into that bathroom and took a shower while their victim lay bludgeoned to death in the next room. That is not an act of passion. That is an act of supreme arrogance. They felt at home in that house. The boyfriend, Jeff, was naturally the first target. He had the opportunity. He had the proximity, and the mother of the victim, Patricia, saw him for exactly what he was. A young man on a path that did not align with her daughter's ambition. But the evidence or the lack thereof told a different story. The autopsy revealed no sexual assault, which shattered the initial theory. Then we have the grandfather, James McGlone, a man with a dark history, a man who had been abusing Brittany for years. When a secret like that dies with the victim, you start to wonder if the killer was trying to silence the truth forever. But the clock, that relentless enemy of the criminal, placed him elsewhere. Then there's a shadow, Chad Carr, a man who was dating the boyfriend's sister. He fits the profile of a predator so perfectly it is almost boring. He had a history of attacking women with a jack handle, a tire iron, the very type of weapon that left those horrific marks on Brittany. He was seen, he was acting strange, and he lied about his whereabouts. He had a failed polygraph, and his alibi was as thin as a sheet of paper. You look at a man like Chad Carr, and you see a pattern of violence that spans years. He is not a mastermind. He is a violent man who believes he can talk his way out of anything. He claimed his DNA would not be found, a statement that rings with the hollow confidence of a man who thinks he has scrubbed away his sins. But you cannot scrub away the truth. The fact that a grand jury failed to indict him is a failure of the system, not a failure of the facts. Brittany was just a young woman with a plan, a young woman saving money for nursing school. She had a future, and in the blink of an eye, it was stolen by someone who felt entitled to her life. It makes me sick. I have dealt with these types for decades, and they all follow the same script. They lie, they deflect, and they hide in the small, tight circles of people who are too afraid or too blind to see them for what they are. The case remains open, as it should. There is DNA in that shower that does not belong to anyone in that household. That is a fact. And facts are stubborn things. They do not go away just because you ignore them. Someone knows. Someone out there is carrying that weight. I tell you, the truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep you try to bury it. And when it does, the look on their face will be exactly the same as all the others. Shock, disbelief, and finally, the cold realization that the game is over. My, justice has a long memory. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most trivial, pathetic reasons you could ever imagine. I have spent my entire life walking through the wreckage of people's lives. And I can tell you one thing for certain. The truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, tucked away in the shadows of small towns where everyone thinks they know everyone else. You think you know your neighbor. You think you know the kid your daughter is dating. But in reality, you do not know them at all. You look at a life like Brittany McGlone, a 19-year-old girl with everything to live for, a girl working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school, and you wonder how a routine day in the life of a small town could turn into a scene of such utter, senseless brutality. My, it is a tragedy that chills you to the bone. On a day in May, in the year 2007, Brittany's routine was broken. She went to her boyfriend's house, a decision that would prove fatal. Now, people in this world have a habit of making mistakes, and her boyfriend, Jeff Stogner, made a choice that left him at the center of a nightmare. He claimed he left for a trip to pick up his grandmother, leaving Brittany to rest. But when the dust settled, the reality of the scene in that bedroom was a textbook definition of a cold-blooded crime. Brittany was found in that bed, taken from this world in the most violent way, struck repeatedly, and the weapon, some sort of iron bar, had vanished into thin air. You have to be kidding me. Someone walks into a house, takes a life, takes a shower, and then just walks out as if they are cleaning up a spill in the kitchen? That is not the work of a stranger. That is the work of someone who felt right at home. I tell you, the arrogance of some perpetrators never ceases to amaze me. They think they are clever. They think they can stage an alibi, but they always leave a trail. You look at the suspects in this case. A collection of individuals with enough secrets to fill a library. There was the boyfriend, the weed-dealing acquaintance, the grandfather with a dark past, all of them circling the truth, yet somehow the investigation stalled. It makes me sick to see a young woman's life reduced to a file gathering dust on a shelf. The grandfather, James McGlone, had a history of abuse that would make any decent person's skin crawl, and yet he had an alibi that checked out. It is a cruel irony, isn't it? To be surrounded by people who are capable of such evil, and yet to be left without justice for nearly 2 decades. Then you look at a man like Chad Carr, a man with a history of violence that echoes the very nature of this murder, the use of a blunt. Object, the same small-town setting, the same pattern of disturbing behavior. He claims he was elsewhere. He claims he was never in that house, but the timeline, the gaps in his story, and that failed polygraph all point in one direction. Why did he act so nervous, so erratic when he appeared at the scene? Because he knew. He knew exactly what he had left behind in that bedroom. He had been down this path before, hitting a woman in the head with a jack handle in 2001, and yet he walked free until he finally faced the consequences for other crimes. To see him arrested for this murder in 2022, only for a grand jury to fail to move forward, is an absolute failure of the system. It is a disgrace to the memory of that young girl. I sit here and I think about Brittany, a girl who deserved a lifetime of accomplishments. A girl who worked for every single penny she had. She was not a statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, a future nurse. And yet, she was silenced by a monster who thought he could just wash the blood off his hands in a shower and fade into the background. You think you know who to trust, but I have seen the dark side of human nature, and I know that evil does not always wear a mask. Sometimes, it wears the face of an acquaintance, a sibling's boyfriend, or a person you pass in the grocery store. My advice to you? Do not let the smallness of a town fool you into a false sense of security. The smaller the circle, the more secrets they keep, and sometimes those secrets are stained with blood. We will continue to wait for justice for Brittany, because as long as there is breath in the lungs of those seeking the truth, the case is never truly closed. And that is the only way it should be. You see, the thing about human beings is that they are such fragile, messy creatures. They walk through this world thinking they are the masters of their own destiny, only to end up as a nameless statistic in some dark corner, written off by the very people sworn to protect them. I have seen it for 30 years, and I tell you, it never gets any easier to stomach. We are talking about a young man named Spencer Irwin, 30 years old, found naked and discarded like trash at the bottom of a loading dock in Fresno, in the year 2024. The police, they arrive on the scene, and they make their fatal mistake immediately. They see a body, they see dirt, they see a situation they think they understand, and they decide right then and there that it is just another drug overdose. No investigation, no real curiosity, just a quick label to close a file. You have to be kidding me. How can anyone in law enforcement look at a human life and decide it is not worth the effort of an autopsy? They claim there were no signs of trauma, so they presume the cause of death without a single drop of medical evidence. They let the poor boy be cremated, erasing the possibility of ever truly knowing what happened to him. That is not just negligence. That is an insult to the sanctity of life. Spencer was not a junkie. He was a son, a student, a man who struggled, yes, but a man who cared deeply for others. His mother, Kelly, she was the only one doing the real work. She was the one chasing shadows while the authorities were busy making excuses about Snow Angel, patterns in the dirt, and natural causes. A medical report that claims natural death for a naked man in a loading dock? Please. That is not a conclusion. That is a resignation. Spencer was found in a place he had no reason to be, carrying a history of helping those less fortunate, and yet the people in power try to gaslight his own family into believing he simply faded away. The tragedy here is the arrogance of the system. They did not want to work. They did not want to follow the trail of the white Kia Soul seen on surveillance footage, or look into the suspicious characters lurking around his life like Angel or Tyler. They wanted a tidy narrative. And when the toxicology report came back, showing no lethal levels of anything, they simply did not care. They had already made up their minds. To tell a grieving mother that her son's death was for the best, that she should be glad he was not struggling anymore, it makes my blood boil. Spencer Irwin was a man who brought light to others in their darkest hours, and he deserved a light to be shown on his own passing. Instead, he got indifference. He got a case file that was practically slammed shut before the ink was dry. It takes a certain kind of cold heart to treat a death like an inconvenience. But this mother, she would not be silenced. She kept digging. She kept pushing, and finally, she forced a real investigation to happen. It is a shame that it took so much agony to get a badge to do what they should have done from the first second they stepped foot on that loading dock. People are not just data points. They are stories, and every story deserves the truth, no matter how inconvenient it might be for the detectives in charge. It is a dark, cold world, and the only thing we have to hold on to is the truth. And I tell you, Justice is a long time coming for Spencer Irwin. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most inexplicable acts for reasons so absurd that they defy all logic and sanity. I have spent a lifetime looking into the abyss, and I tell you, nothing prepares you for the sheer indifference of the universe when it meets the incompetence of those sworn to protect the truth. You have to be kidding me. We are talking about the case of Spencer Irwin, a 30-year-old man whose life was extinguished in the cold, hard reality of a Fresno loading dock in the year 2024. The authorities, in their infinite and lazy wisdom, decided upon finding him naked and discarded amidst the refuse that this was simply another drug. Overdose. They did not investigate. They did not collect evidence. They simply checked a box and moved on with their day, leaving a mother, Kelly Irwin, to pick up the pieces of a narrative they were too blind to read. Spencer was not the man they painted him to be. He was a man fighting his own demons, struggling with alcohol, yes, but he was not a man who lived his life in the shadows of drug addiction. His mother knew him. She saw the soul that others ignored. When she was told that her firstborn had been found deceased, her world fractured. They denied her the right to see him, offering only excuses that crumbled under the slightest pressure. 5 days of agony, only to be told he was in a state of decomposition that would haunt her forever. They did not perform an autopsy. How do you investigate a death without the most fundamental tool of the trade? They relied on toxicology screens that proved absolutely nothing, yet they clung to their assumption with a stubbornness that is frankly pathetic. The lack of professional curiosity here is staggering. They cited a so-called snow angel pattern in the dirt as evidence of an overdose, a theory that falls apart when you look at the geometry of it. It was too symmetrical, too clean, too devoid of the chaotic reality of a human life struggling for its final breath. And the clothing, where were the clothes? If a man stripped down to his skin in his final moments, those items should have been documented, collected, and cataloged. Instead, they were lost to history, just as the truth was lost to their arrogance. When the toxicology report finally surfaced, it revealed only alcohol and common medications, none of which at lethal levels. They tried to rewrite his death as natural causes, a convenient label for a conclusion they reached before they even began. A sheriff coroner with a background in agriculture and criminal justice, devoid of medical expertise, deciding the fate of a human soul. It is a grim reminder that in this world, who you vote for matters more than the color of their tie. Kelly Irwin became the detective they refused to be. She traced his steps, she mapped his final days, and she uncovered the presence of others in his orbit. There was Angel, a man whose presence in Spencer's life and in his apartment remains a tangled web of inconsistency. There was the white Kia Soul, caught on a security camera, gliding in and out of the shadows like a ghost, lights extinguished, suggesting a level of intent that is anything but natural. And there was a laptop, the stolen property that pointed toward a neighbor, a man named Tyler, a man who allegedly possessed a dark and violent streak. Every time Kelly brought a piece of this puzzle to the authorities, they met her with gaslighting and dismissiveness. They told her to stop, that it was not safe, that the case was closed. They wanted her to accept a lie, because the truth requires effort, and effort is something they were evidently not willing to expend. I have looked at the photographs of the crime scene. I have seen that straight, unmistakable line under his jaw, a mark that screams for a forensic explanation that will never come because the body has been cremated. The incompetence is not just a failure of procedure. It is a moral failure. They looked at a man and saw a statistic, a transient, a case that could be discarded in the dustbin of a loading dock. They did not see the man who fed the hungry and gave hope to the lost. They did not see the human being who saved at least one soul before his own was stolen from him. You have to ask yourself, if they can treat a case like this with such contempt, who is truly safe? The investigation into Spencer Irwin is a testament to the fact that justice is not something you receive. It is something you must demand, fight for, and sometimes hold on to until your very last breath. It is a tragedy through and through, and the silence of those who should have spoken is the loudest part of the entire ordeal. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most inexplicable acts for reasons so flimsy, so utterly nonsensical, that they defy the logic of a sane mind. I have spent a lifetime looking into the abyss of human behavior, and I tell you, it never gets any easier to stomach the sheer incompetence that sometimes masquerades as law. Enforcement? You have to be kidding me. When you look at the case of Spencer Irwin, you are not just looking at a death. You are looking at a system that decided it was easier to ignore the truth than to do the work required to uncover it. It is a tragedy of monumental proportions when those sworn to serve and protect decide that a life, a 30-year-old man with a mother who loved him and a future he was fighting to build, is nothing more than a statistic to be filed away under the convenient label of an overdose. Spencer Irwin was a young man wrestling with his own demons, specifically in struggle with alcohol that he was open about, and he was doing his best to climb out of that dark hole. He was a student, a person who found in his heart to extend a hand to others less fortunate, a man who believed in the inherent value of every soul. Yet, when he was found at a loading dock in Fresno, stripped of his clothing and lying in the dirt, the authorities saw only a discarded life. They saw the lack of external trauma and immediately constructed a narrative of a drug overdose, a path of least resistance that allowed them to avoid a real investigation. They did not conduct an autopsy. They did not secure the scene properly. They simply checked the box that made their day easier and closed the case. That is not just negligence. It is an insult to the memory of the dead and a betrayal of the living. Think about the sheer audacity of that presumption. They saw patterns in the dirt, what they called a snow angel, and decided, without a shred of toxicology evidence, that he had stripped himself naked in a heat-induced delirium. When the toxicology reports finally arrived months later, they did not support that narrative at all. There were no lethal levels of illicit drugs. There was no clear explanation. Yet, because the body had already been cremated, the truth was permanently obscured, locked away by the haste of a system that had no interest in being thorough. It makes me sick. You have a mother, Kelly Irwin, who becomes the real detective in this story. A woman driven by a love that is more powerful than any bureaucratic wall. She does the legwork. She finds the surveillance footage of a mysterious white car, and she asks the questions that the professionals refuse to even contemplate. The interior life of Spencer Irwin was one of quiet struggle and genuine kindness. He was not a saint, but he was a human being who deserved a fair accounting of his final moments. He had been planning to check into a rehabilitation program, try and take control of his life, and instead, he found himself in a nightmare that no one bothered to solve. And then, there is the other side of this dark coin, the people in his orbit, the individuals like Angel, who were present in his life and his home, whose stories were inconsistent and who vanished when the light of scrutiny shone too brightly. The investigators seem to have spent more time trying to validate their initial laziness than chasing these leads. When a detective tells a grieving mother that she should be relieved her son is dead because he is, no longer struggling with addiction, you have to wonder if they have forgotten what it means to be human. It is cold, it is cruel, and it is a reminder that in this world, justice is often something you have to fight for with everything you have. The imagery of the crime scene remains etched in the mind. A young man, vulnerable and alone, surrounded by the indifference of a loading dock, the mark on his neck, the mystery of the missing clothing, the suspicious activity caught on camera. These are not things that disappear just because you close. A file folder. They are screaming for answers. A forensic pathologist looking at those photos would tell you that the lack of an autopsy is a failure of epic proportions. When you choose to ignore the evidence of a possible struggle or a suspicious death, you are not maintaining order. You are allowing a killer, or perhaps a secret, to remain hidden in the shadows. I tell you, It is a profound failure of the human spirit to look at a mother's pain and offer nothing but apathy. In return, we owe it to the victims, we owe it to the families, and we owe it to the truth itself to be better than this. It is a long, winding road to justice, and sometimes the only thing that keeps us moving forward is the unwavering resolve of someone who refuses to let the truth be buried with the dead. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most unthinkable acts for a reason so absurd, so trivial, that they would make your stomach turn. They leave behind a trail of broken hearts and unanswered questions, and they expect the world to simply move on. But there is one thing they forget. The truth has a habit of clawing its way back to the surface. My. You have to be kidding me if you think you can just write off a man's life as a mere administrative error. Spencer Irwin was 30 years old. He was a son, a man who possessed a heart large enough to reach out to the broken. And he ended up cold and alone at the bottom of a loading dock in Fresno. The authorities, in their infinite and lazy wisdom, decided the book was closed before they even finished the prologue. They saw a man in the dirt, naked, and they checked a box that said overdose. It is a pathetic excuse for police work. I tell you, incompetence is often more dangerous than malice. Consider the landscape here. You have a mother, Kelly Irwin, who is forced to become her own detective because the people paid to protect and serve decided they were too busy to do their jobs. They told her there was no evidence. Of course there was no evidence. They failed to collect a single thing. They left a young man to decompose and then, with the callousness of a machine, suggested that his death was natural. Natural causes? Since when is it natural for a 30-year-old man to vanish, strip naked, and expire in the shadows of a waste management storage facility? It is not natural. It is a failure of humanity. Spencer struggled with alcohol. Yes, and he fought his own personal demons with a courage most men will never know. But the toxicology report, it showed no lethal levels of anything. The science did not support their convenient little fairy tale. Yet they insisted. They gaslit a grieving mother. They told her the case was closed while the real answers were buried under a shroud of sheer, unadulterated apathy. I look at the details, and I see a man who was walking toward a better future, a man who had a plan to enter rehabilitation. He was not a man looking for a place to die. He was a man looking for a place to get fixed. When I hear about the white vehicle seen on the surveillance footage, pulling in and killing its lights in the dead of night, I do not see a coincidence. I see a predator, or perhaps a participant in something much darker. The witnesses, the ones the police ignored, spoke of marks on his neck. A mark that could have been a ligature. A mark that screams homicide to anyone with half a brain and a shred of integrity. But the official report, it ignores the mark. It ignores the missing clothing. It ignores the basic, fundamental logic of a crime scene. What moves a man to such a desperate end? Was it the betrayal of someone he trusted? Someone like Angel, who seemed to orbit his life with stories that never quite added up? Or was it the neighbor, Tyler, a man who allegedly stole from him and left him intimidated? You have to understand, the interior life of the victim is often the key that unlocks the door to the killer. Spencer was a man who valued others, a man who would stop in the middle of a trail to offer kindness to a stranger. That kindness was his strength, but in the wrong environment, it was his vulnerability. The victim and the perpetrator are often linked by threads of geography and intent that investigators are simply too lazy to pull. The truth is never hidden. It is just waiting for someone who cares enough to look. We are left with a story that should have been solved in a week, now stretching across years of silence and frustration. A mother's love is a powerful weapon, and it is the only thing standing between Spencer Irwin and total oblivion. If there is justice in this world, it is only because someone refused to stop asking why. I tell you, you have to be kidding me if you think this is where the story ends. It is only where it finally begins. You look at a scene like this, And you have to wonder if the people in charge were even awake when they arrived. People are strange creatures. They leave behind messes, secrets, and half-truths, and then they expect the world to just keep spinning as if nothing happened. You have a 30-year-old man, Spencer Irwin, found discarded like a piece of trash at a loading dock in Fresno in the heat of August 2024. The authorities, they didn't see a human being. They saw a statistic. They saw a naked body, a bit of dirt, and they checked the box that said overdose, case closed. I tell you, that is the lazy man's way to handle a tragedy. You have to be kidding me. When a mother has to turn into a detective because the people wearing the badges are too busy, looking for the exit, you know something is fundamentally broken in the system. Kelly Irwin did not get the luxury of mourning her son in peace. She was handed a wall of indifference. They told her he died of natural causes, a cardiac event brought on by his struggles. But they didn't even bother to perform an autopsy. How do you rule a death natural when you haven't looked inside the man to see what broke? That is not investigation, that is guesswork. And when you guess with human life, you are destined to be wrong. Let's talk about the logic. The police pointed to a lack of footprints in the dirt, the so-called snow angel pattern, and claimed it was a result of a drug-induced delirium. But consider the victim. Spence was a man who cared. He was reaching out, try to get help, try and pull himself back from the edge of his own personal darkness. He was not a party animal. And he was not the type to strip naked in a random industrial lot 4 miles from where he started. When you see something that does not make sense, you stop and you look again. The marks in the dirt were too symmetrical, too clean. They tell a story of placement, not a frantic, dying man thrashing about. Then you have the white Kia Soul, caught on a grainy security camera, creeping into that area at 10 in the evening. Lights off, sneaking around like a thief in the night. And the individuals involved? Angel, who was supposed to be in rehab, and Tyler, a neighbor with a history of taking things that did not belong to him. You follow the threads, and you find a tangled web of lies, missing belongings, and suspicious digital footprints. Spencer had a phone, and that phone had a story to tell. Yet the people who were supposed to protect the truth were content to let the trail go cold. I have walked many crime scenes in my time, and I have learned that the devil is always in the details. You look at those crime scene photos, and you see the line across the neck. A forensic pathologist would tell you it is a red flag that screams for attention. Yet the local officials ignored it. They gaslit a grieving mother, trying to convince her that the tragedy was a simple, sad conclusion to a troubled life. They did not want the truth. They wanted a file off their desk. Spencer Irwin was a man who saved souls. He was a light in the dark for those who had nowhere else to go. To see him reduced to a nameless transient by the very people sworn to protect him is a slap in the face of justice. We are talking about right and wrong, not just policy and procedure. When you treat the death of a human being with such casual neglect, you invite the darkness to stay. Kelly Irwin is not stopping, and she is right to push. A mother's intuition is a powerful thing, and in this case, it is the only thing keeping the truth from being buried along with her son. You keep asking the questions, even when they tell you to stop, because at the end of the day, when you are standing in front of the truth, you have to be able to say you did everything in your power to bring it into the light. Humans are strange creatures. They kill for the most pathetic reasons you could ever imagine. And then you have cases like this. My, you have to be kidding me. You look at a man like Spencer Irwin, a 30-year-old soul who spent his life trying to lift others out of the darkness, only to find himself discarded like trash at the bottom of a loading dock. The police in Fresno took one look at him, naked and covered in dirt, and decided they had seen enough. They did not see a man. They saw a statistic. They saw a transient who likely overdosed, and they decided that was the end of the story. I tell you, that is not an investigation. That is an insult to the badge and a betrayal of every oath sworn to protect the truth. Kelly Irwin, a mother who knew her son better than any coroner with a degree in agricultural business ever could, knew the authorities were wrong. She knew her son was not a drug casualty. She was told to wait 5 agonizing days to see him, only to be denied that final dignity because of the advanced state of decomposition. And yet, the medical examiner had the audacity to rule his death natural, based on probable cardiac arrest, all without performing an autopsy. How do you call something natural when you have not looked inside to see what actually occurred? It is lazy. It is negligent. It is precisely the kind of incompetence that lets monsters walk free. Let us look at the facts. Spencer leaves his home on a Sunday morning, dressed, carrying a backpack, heading to a store 4 miles away. He vanishes into thin air. When they find him days later, he is naked in a shaded area where he would not have been exposed to the elements long enough to justify such a state. There were no footprints around him, only a pattern in the dirt that looked like a snow angel. If he had been having some medical crisis, he would have been thrashing, sure, but a lack of footprints in that specific spot suggests he did not arrive there on his own too. Feet. He was placed there by someone. You have this angel character, a man Spencer was trying to help, a man found inside Spencer's home after he had already gone missing. You have a white Kia Soul captured on surveillance footage, driving into that yard, killing its lights, and lingering for 15 minutes in the dead of night. And what do the detectives do? They gaslight a grieving mother. They tell her the case is closed. They try to convince her that her son died of a drug overdose, even when the toxicology report shows no lethal levels of anything. It makes your blood boil. It is a total breakdown of logic. A mother becomes an investigator because she has no other choice. She uncovers evidence. She maps the timeline. She finds witnesses who saw a purple mark on the back of his neck, suggesting something far more sinister than a cardiac event. A real forensic pathologist looks at those seen photos and sees a potential ligature mark. She sees the symmetrical marks in the dirt and realizes they do not fit the narrative of a man dying. In agony, they look like something else entirely, something staged. We are left with a tragedy compounded by apathy. Spencer Irwin was a man of character who helped the lost, yet in his final hour, he was treated as a disposable object by those who were supposed to serve justice. He deserved better. Kelly Irwin deserved better. The truth is still buried somewhere in that loading dock, hidden by the shadow of a botched initial response. But here's the thing about the truth. It has a way of coming to the surface. It just takes someone with the grit to keep digging when everyone else has already turned their backs and walked away. I tell you, you cannot hide forever. The light eventually finds everything. My, you have to be kidding me. Humans are such strange creatures. They walk through this life leaving a trail of wreckage, and they kill for the most trivial reasons imaginable. Some lose their lives because they were in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong people. And then there are those who are tasked with finding the truth, the ones wearing the badge, who sometimes, through sheer laziness or arrogance, decide that the truth is just too much trouble to uncover. I tell you, it is a sad state of affairs when a mother has to become a detective because the system that swore to protect and serve decided that her son was just another statistic to be swept under the rug. Let us look at Spencer Irwin, a 30-year-old man, a soul who actually gave a damn about the people living on the fringes of society. He was found in 2024, naked, discarded at the bottom of a loading dock in Fresno, California. And what did the experts do? They looked at the scene, they took one look at his past, and they checked a box. Overdose. Case closed. Move along. Nothing to see here. They did not do an autopsy. They did not secure the scene properly. They acted as if the man was disposable. It makes my blood boil. You have to understand, in this line of work, the dead cannot speak, but they do tell a story. If you do not bother to listen, you are not doing your job. You are just occupying space. Spence was not a saint. He struggled with the bottle, and he was fighting his own demons, trying to find his way to recovery. But there's a massive chasm between a man struggling with his vices and a man found dead in a loading dock with no clothes and no explanation. When the toxicology results finally crawled back months later, they proved the authorities were dead wrong. There were no lethal levels of anything, no massive drug overdose, just a void where the truth should have been, because they had already cremated the evidence. They burned it all away, along with any chance for a real answer. I have spent my life looking at the worst of humanity, and I have seen how quickly a case goes cold when people stop caring. The so-called investigators claimed it was natural causes. Natural causes? Since when does a man die of natural causes and end up stripped naked in a desolate shipping yard? It is a pathetic excuse for an investigation. It is a dereliction of duty. They gaslit that mother. They told her it was time to let go, that her son's death was an open and shut case of a life led by addiction, when in reality, they were just too lazy to look for the bruises or the marks on his neck that a witness saw, but they conveniently ignored. Think about the psychology of the predators in this story. You have individuals like Angel and Tyler, people circling the edges of Spencer's life. Spencer was a man who tried to help the broken, and in doing so, he likely let the wrong wolves into the fold. You see this all the time. The victim is often the one who holds the door open, believing in the goodness of others, while the predator is looking for an opportunity to take. The car, that white Kia Soul caught on surveillance acting in the shadows, it is not a coincidence. It is a piece of a puzzle that the police refuse to assemble. Kelly Irwin, that mother, she is a hero here. She did what no one else would. She mapped out her son's final movements. She tracked down the witnesses. And she stood in front of detectives who were more interested in protecting their own initial bias than in finding justice. She proved that there was no natural explanation, only a manufactured one. It is a damn shame that she had to do their work for them. When a professional investigator refuses to see the inconsistencies, the lack of footprints, the suspicious timeline, the missing personal property, they are not just failing the family, they are failing the badge. You have to wonder if they had treated Spencer with the respect every human being deserves. If they had done the autopsy the moment he was found, would we be sitting here today asking questions? Probably not. The truth has a way of hiding when you stop looking for it. And now, the trail is cold, the evidence is scattered, and the suspect has been allowed to drift away into the fog. It is a cautionary tale, my friend. A reminder that in this world, if you want the truth, you have to be the one to dig for it, even when everyone else is trying to bury it. I tell you, it is enough to make a man lose his faith in everything. But we keep going, because for the sake of the victim, someone has to. Human beings are curious creatures. They make mistakes, they chase shadows, and sometimes they end up in places they never should have been. But what I cannot abide, what truly grinds my gears, is the failure of those sworn to protect to even bother looking at the evidence that is staring them right in the face. My, you have to be kidding me. You see, the story of Spencer Irwin is not just a tragedy. It is a glaring indictment of institutional laziness. Spencer Irwin was 30 years old. He had a mother, Kelly, who loved him, and he had a heart that, despite his struggles with alcohol, still beat for others. He was found naked at the bottom of a loading dock in Fresno in the month of August, 2024. The local authorities, in their infinite and maddening wisdom, looked at the scene, saw a man who had clearly been through some things, and decided they had seen it all before. They whispered the word overdose, closed their mental files, and effectively erased the possibility of a real investigation before the ink on the initial report was even dry. I tell you, there is nothing more dangerous than an assumption. The police saw what they wanted to see. They saw a man without clothes. They saw marks in the dirt, and they called it a day. But Spencer was not a throwaway. His mother, Kelly, proved that, while the detectives were busy telling her that her son died of natural causes. She was out on the streets, knocking on doors, collecting surveillance footage, and doing the heavy lifting that the badge wearers should have been doing from hour one. When you strip away the layers of apathy, you are left with a chilling reality. The toxicology results came back, and guess what? They did not show a lethal overdose. They showed a man who was struggling. Yes, but not a man who died from the poisons the police were so eager to blame. And then there is the matter of the surveillance footage. A white Kia Soul pulls up to that loading dock at 10 in the evening. The lights go off. It stays for 15 minutes. And then it vanishes. Someone was there. Someone knew something. But the police? They were too busy deciding the case was closed to follow the trail. I have spent my life looking at the worst of humanity, and I have learned that evil rarely announces itself with a trumpet blast. It hides in the cracks of incompetence. It hides when people choose an easy answer, because a hard answer requires work. Spencer deserved better. He was a man who, despite his own demons, took the time to help the homeless, to be a light for those who had been discarded by society. And yet, in his final moments, the very people who were supposed to find justice for him looked at him and saw nothing more than a statistic. They told his mother he died of natural causes. Natural causes? Since when does a man wander 4 miles in the heat, strip himself bare, and collapse at a loading dock because of his blood pressure? That is not an investigation. That is a fairy tale for the lazy. There was a mark on his neck, a line that whispered of violence, a line that demanded professional autopsy, an autopsy that never happened because the authorities simply did not care enough to order it. By the time they finished their charade, they had cremated the evidence. The inner life of a man like Spencer is a battlefield of hope and despair. He wanted to get clean. He was reaching out for a life that was slipping through his fingers. And the people who might have been involved in his final hours, they are ghosts in the machine. Angel, the man who was in his apartment, the man whose birthday digits appeared in a mysterious social media handle, the man who vanished into the ether, and Tyler, the neighbor who allegedly stole his laptop, the man they called Happy, who seemed to thrive in the darkness of other people's misery. You see, a mother's love is a powerful thing, but it should not have to be a forensic tool. Kelly Irwin had to become a detective because the ones on the payroll failed her. They gaslit her, they dismissed her, and they treated her son's life as a nuisance to be managed rather than a human soul to be honored. It is a pathetic state of affairs when a parent knows more about the movements of their child than the people with the access to the traffic cameras and the legal authority to get the truth. I look at the photographs of that scene, the snow angel patterns in the dirt, the cold, hard geometry of a life ended in silence, and I feel nothing but a cold, burning rage. If you do not perform an autopsy, you are not investigating a death. You are guessing. And when you guess, you bury the truth along with the body. Justice requires more than a uniform and a badge. It requires a brain that is willing to engage, a heart that is willing to feel, and a spine that is willing to do the work. Spencer Irwin was a man who tried to save others. It is a damn shame that when his time came, there was nobody there to save him, and even fewer willing to admit that his death was a question that remained painfully, hauntingly unanswered. Humans are strange creatures. They perish for the most trivial, nonsensical reasons you could ever imagine. Sometimes, the most important work in a murder investigation is not done by the men in uniform, but by the broken-hearted who refuse to let the truth be buried under a mountain of administrative laziness. You have to be kidding me. You find a man dead at the bottom of a loading dock, naked and covered in dirt, and you decide it is a drug overdose without even blinking? It is a convenient label. It saves paperwork. It keeps the statistics looking pretty. But it is lazy, it is incompetent, and I tell you, it is a slap in the face of justice. Spencer Irwin was 30 years old. He was a son, a student, and a man who fought his own demons with an honesty that most people in this world lack. He struggled with alcohol. Sure, we all have our battles, but he was trying. He was looking for a way out of the darkness. When the authorities in Fresno told his mother, Kelly, that her son had died of natural causes because they found no evidence of a struggle, they were not just wrong, they were negligent. How can you call a death natural when a man is found in a place he had no business being, stripped of his clothing, with no explanation for his final movements? The arrogance it takes to close a file without an autopsy is something that makes my blood boil. They dismissed him as just another soul lost to the streets, failing to see that the man they were discarding was the very same man who had spent his life trying to save others. You have to look at the geometry of a crime scene. Nature is rarely symmetrical, but the marks found around Spencer were. The investigators claimed it was a snow angel pattern from an overdose. I have seen thousands of bodies, and I tell you, the human body does not move with such perfect, circular geometry during a medical crisis. That is not biology. That is something else. And the neck, a single, straight line visible in the crime scene photographs. It is the kind of mark that screams for a forensic pathologist to take a long, hard look. Instead, it was ignored. They let the body be cremated before a proper search for the truth could be conducted. They effectively erased the evidence of his final moments. The psychology of the people involved is a dark, tangled mess. You have a man named Angel, someone who entered Spencer's life for only 3 weeks, occupying his home and weaving a web of lies about his whereabouts. You have a neighbor, Tyler, possibly stealing a laptop, a piece of plastic and circuitry that might hold the key to a motive or at least a reason for a confrontation. And yet, the police were too busy telling a grieving mother to go home and stay safe to actually put these pieces together. They wanted the case to go away because a closed case is a quiet case. They were gaslighting a mother who was doing their job better than they ever could. Think about the humanity of it. Spencer was a man who saw worth in everyone. He reached out to the forgotten, the homeless, the people most would walk past without a second glance. He believed in saving one soul. And yet, in his own end, the people who were sworn to protect the public failed to see any value in him at all. It is a tragedy of the highest order. A mother should not have to fight a war against the very institutions designed to help her. But Kelly Irwin did. She did not just sit back. She collected the facts. She tracked the timeline. And she forced them to acknowledge that their version of reality was a fairy tale. The truth is rarely comfortable. It is often ugly, cold, and hidden in the dark corners where nobody wants to look. Whether it was the wrong place, the wrong time, or the wrong people, we may never know the full extent of what happened that night. But one thing is certain. The dismissal of Spencer Irwin was a failure of the soul. We owe it to the victims to be better than our own assumptions. We owe it to them to look closer, to dig deeper, and to never, ever be satisfied with a convenient answer. When a human life has been extinguished, it is a long, hard road to justice, and sometimes the only thing that keeps you moving is the stubborn, unrelenting light of the truth. My. You see, people often ask me why I spent so many years staring into the abyss of human cruelty. They want to know why I can still sleep at night after seeing what men are capable of. It is because the truth does not care about your feelings, and it certainly does not care about your assumptions. People are strange creatures. They kill for the most trivial, pathetic reasons you could ever conjure up, and then they lie about it with a straight face. But you know what is even worse than the killer? It is the people whose job it is to uncover the truth, but who decide that a file is too heavy to carry, so they just throw it in the trash. I tell you, you have to be kidding me. We are talking about Spencer Irwin, a 30-year-old man, found naked in the dirt at the bottom of a loading dock in Fresno in the year 2024. And what do the boys in blue do? They look at him, they see the dirt, they see the lack of shoes, and they decide it is an overdose. A quick, easy story to tell, so they can get back to their coffee. There was no autopsy. Let that sink in. A man is dead in a place he should not be, in a state that defies all logic, and the authorities decide that they have seen enough. It is a level of incompetence that would be laughable if it were not so damn tragic. Kelly Irwin, the mother, is the only one in this story with a spine. She knows her son. She knows he struggled with the bottle. Sure, but she knows he was not a man who went out seeking a drug cocktail to end his life. She had to fight for every scrap of information, while the coroner and the police treated her like a nuisance. They gave her the natural causes excuse, a convenient blanket to cover up a total lack of effort. You do not need a badge or a law degree to see when someone is being lied to. You just need to pay attention to the details. And the details here were screaming for help. Look at the crime scene. There were these marks around his head and arms, like a snow angel in the dirt. The police want to call it an overdose reaction. I have walked 1,000 crime scenes, and I have never seen a man strip naked and draw pictures in the dirt because of a drug. It is irrational. And a lack of footprints? If he walked there, there should be tracks. If he did not leave tracks, it means he was placed there. It is not rocket science. It is basic investigation. Someone is missing from the picture, and the police were too busy looking at the wall to see the person standing right in front of them. Then there is the matter of the white Kia Soul, caught on a security camera, turning off its lights like a thief in the night, and the mystery man, Angel, who was found in Spencer's apartment, lying about where Spencer had gone, lie about being a cousin. A man is dead, his life is extinguished, and these people are playing games with the truth. You have a mother forced to do the detective work, because the people paid by the taxpayers decided that a dead man in a loading dock was not worth the paperwork. It is a disgrace. Spencer was a man who tried to help others. He gave what little he had to those who had nothing, even when he was fighting his own demons. He was a human being with value, with a life that mattered, but he was treated like a discarded piece of trash. A mother should never have to carry the burden of solving her own child's murder. It is not how the world is supposed to work. But in the shadows of this investigation, you see the true nature of man, the indifference of the system, the arrogance of those who think they know everything without looking at anything, and the relentless, burning love of a mother who will not stop until the world knows what really happened to her boy. I tell you, it is enough to make you lose faith in humanity, if you had any left to begin with. But we do not quit. We keep pulling at the threads until the whole ugly tapestry falls apart. Because eventually, the truth has a way of coming into the light, whether you want it to or not. Human beings, they are strange creatures. They will trade the sanctity of a life for a bag of powder, and then, when the sun comes up, they will look you in the eye and spin a web of lies so thin it would not even stop a winter breeze. My, you have to be kidding me. The story of Christopher Cole Thomas is not a story of a tragic accident. It is a story of a young man who was simply trying to find his way in a world that, unfortunately, was far darker than he ever anticipated. Cole was 22. He was a salutatorian. He was a kid with a brain that worked and a heart that cared about his brother. He was not a criminal. He was a young man feeling the weight of the world, taking a detour to earn a paycheck. And he ended up in a car with people who viewed his life as an inconvenience. It was the early morning hours of the day after Thanksgiving, in the year 2016, in the quiet town of Benson, North Carolina. Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter rolled up to a police station with a story that smelled worse than a week-old catch. They claimed Cole had just hopped out of the car, panicked, and ran into the dark, vanishing into the night like a ghost. They played the part of concerned friends, but they did not even bother to call his parents. They went back to their lives. They went back to work. Who does that? I tell you, when people tell you they are worried. But their actions suggest they are actually relieved the problem walked away. You had better start paying attention to the cracks in their story. Then you have the father, Chris, a man who refused to sit idle. He went digging on his own, finding the truth that the police were struggling to uncover. He found out that this was not a spontaneous road trip to visit family. This was a supply run. They went to Mount Olive to buy methamphetamine. And suddenly, the paranoia Cole showed that night does not look like a mental breakdown. It looks like the survival instinct of a young man who realized, perhaps too late, that he was sitting in a car with people who were playing a very dangerous game of very dangerous. People, we have the surveillance footage. The eyes of the law do not blink. Captain Greg Percy sat at his kitchen table, staring at hours of grainy video, until he saw it. 1 a.m, Cole walking across the frame, not alone, but with Jeremy Carpenter trailing behind him. The lie was exposed. They were not just standing around. They were moving, and they were hiding the truth. And all the while, these individuals were holding onto Cole's phone, moving it around like a piece of evidence they did not know how to discard, eventually turning it off when the heat got too high. Think about the desperation in that, the sheer stupidity of it. They thought they could outrun the truth by changing their story every time the police caught them. In a falsehood, they went from claiming he ran off in a fit of mania to Jeremy claiming he was praying at a church while he heard gunshots or car doors. It is a pathetic attempt to distance oneself from the reality of the situation. People like that, they do not care about the truth. They only care about the story that keeps them out of the cage. The investigation led to arrests. It led to the uncovering of a network, including individuals like Rudy and TJ and that shadow figure they call Gordo. There is a theory, a cold and calculated one, that Julian Valles Jr. might have been double-crossing his associates, planning to pay for the drugs and then steal them back. If that is true, then Cole was not just a driver. He was a liability. He was a witness who understood Spanish well enough to hear what he was not supposed to hear. He was a young man who probably tried to do the right thing, or at least the safest thing, by throwing those drugs out a window, and for that, he may have paid the ultimate price. It is a tragedy of the highest order, a bright future snuffed out because of a desperate, miserable, and empty-headed pursuit of illegal goods. The people who were with him, they kept their mouths shut. They offered breadcrumbs, changing their narratives whenever the pressure became too great. But they never offered the one thing that matters. They never offered the location of that boy. Now, years later, the parents are still searching. The police are still working. The people involved have served time for their silence and their obstruction. But they have yet to answer the question that keeps a mother and a father awake at night. Where is Cole? To those involved, I say this. You can hide behind your lawyers and your lies for only so long. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, and it is a cold, hard thing to face. It is time to speak. It is time to bring him home. Because if you think you've gotten away with it, you are only fooling yourselves. The dead do not talk, but the evidence, the phone data, and the consistency of the lies speak volumes. And I promise you, the truth is coming. As I look at this case, I have to reflect on the nature of the people involved. It is easy to look at someone like Cole and see a victim, but he was more than that. He was a son, a brother, a student with dreams. He represents the kind of person who is just trying to get by, who gets caught in the orbit of people who have no regard for human life. The saddest part about human nature is not the evil that some do, but the indifference of those who stand by and let it happen. These men, they did not just let it happen. They curated it. They participated in it. They watched a young man disappear and decided that their own skins were more important than his. So, it is a stain that no amount of time will ever wash away. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most foolish act for a reason so petty, so hollow, that you would swear it was a sick joke if it were not for the cold reality of a life cut short. You see, the truth has a funny way of hiding in plain sight, buried under a mountain of shifting stories and cowardice. My, you would think that when a young man goes missing in the dead of night, the people who were with him would have a simple, coherent answer. Instead, we have a mess of lies that bend and twist like a snake in the grass. This is the story of Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man who vanished into the dark, leaving behind nothing but a trail of deceit. It was just after 3 a.m. on Black Friday in 2016. The town of Benson, North Carolina, was asleep, but two men, Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter, walked into a police station with a tale so flimsy it should have set every alarm bell ringing. They claimed they were on their way back to Minnesota when their companion, Cole, suddenly turned paranoid, grabbed the keys, leaped out of the car, and sprinted into the night until he vanished. A grown man, 22 years old, running into the pitch black of a place he had never been, leaving his friends behind. You have to be kidding me. I tell you, when people start offering up stories about sudden mental breakdowns and mysterious disappearances, my internal radar starts screaming that someone is holding back. The tragedy here is not just that Cole disappeared. It is that his own family was kept in the dark for days. These men, these so-called friends who worked beside him on a construction site, did not have the decency to call his parents in Florida. Cole was a bright young man, a salutatorian who had dreams of medicine, a young man who was just trying to earn a paycheck and take a breather from his studies. He was not a drifter. He was a son, a brother, a human being with a future. And while his father, Chris, scrambled to find answers through social media, he uncovered reality that shattered his world. His son had not gone on a simple road trip. He had been dragged into a desperate, dangerous world of drug deals and shadow men. When the truth finally started to leak, it was like pulling teeth. They weren't there for Thanksgiving dinner. They were there for methamphetamine. They were playing with fire in a place called Mount Olive, meeting men who did not deal in second chances. And suddenly, the story of Cole running away takes on a much darker shade. Was he paranoid? Or was he terrified because he realized exactly who he was with and what was happening? I suspect the latter. The surveillance footage eventually caught them, Cole walking and Jeremy following him. He did not walk off alone. He was being tracked. It is the oldest story in the book. The weak trying to cover their tracks by feeding the authorities just enough truth to stay out of. The crosshairs, while holding back the one detail that actually matters. The investigation became a labyrinth of cell phone data and shifting testimonies. They had Cole's phone. They had it the whole time, and yet they said nothing. Why? Because when you are up to your neck in obstruction of justice and the concealment of a death, silence becomes your only defense. Even when the private investigator, David, managed to get one of them, TJ, out on bond in a desperate attempt to find the truth, the walls did not fully crumble. They spoke in fragments, hints of things gone wrong, of drugs missing, of a man named Gordo, and of a car door slamming in the distance. It is an insult to the intelligence of any investigator to suggest that a group of men, moving in concert, with technology tracking their every step, just happens to forget how a life was ended. The charges were brought, then dropped to protect future prosecution. But the hunt never stopped. One of those men, Jeremy Carpenter, took his secrets to the grave in 2024. Now, we are left with the cold, hard data. Cell towers do not lie. They do not have a vested interest in protecting their own skin. They show us the path. They show us the movement. And they tell us that this did not end in a field in Benson. It ended in the shadows of Wayne County. Somewhere out there, a secret is waiting to be told. Someone knows exactly where Christopher Cole Thomas lies. And I tell you, no matter how deep they think they have buried the truth, there's always a way for the light to get in. If you have a conscience left, if there's a shred of humanity remaining in you, it is time to say it out loud, before the data finishes the story for you. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most trivial reasons imaginable, and they do it with a level of stupidity that defies logic. You look at a case like this, and you have to ask yourself, how much is a life worth? Apparently, in the eyes of some, it is worth less than a bag of white powder. My, you have to be kidding me. This is the story of Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man with a future that was cut short by a group of people who would not know the truth if it bit them on the nose. It is just after 3 a.m. on Black Friday in 2016. Most people are home, tucked away in their beds, but not our players. Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter walk into a police department parking lot in Benson, North Carolina. They are calm, too calm. They have a story, a rehearsed little play that they think will satisfy the authorities. They claim they were traveling with their friend, Christopher Cole Thomas, who went by Cole. They say he started acting paranoid, pulled a car over, and just vanished into the dark. They want you to believe that a young man from Florida, who had never stepped foot in this town, simply decided to go for a midnight stroll into nowhere. I tell you, when the truth bends like that, it is not confusion. It is a bold-faced lie. Cole was 22. He was a salutatorian of his high school, a kid who had his eyes set on a career in medicine to help his brother. He was not a career criminal. He was a young man looking for a way to make some money, taking a contract construction job in Minnesota. That is where he met these two characters. He did not know them well, yet he found himself in a car heading across state lines with them. Why? Because sometimes, in your early 20s, you think you are bulletproof. You think you can just drift through the world without consequences. But life is not a drift. It is a series of hard choices. The parents, Chris and Kathy, did not even know their son was in North Carolina. Imagine a phone call that shatters your entire world. They get a call from the police, and suddenly their son is a ghost. They start digging, and they find out that these so-called friends were not there for Thanksgiving dinner. They were there for a drug deal. They met up with two men, Rudolfo De Leon Jr. and Anthony James Jr. Rudy and TJ. The names change, the stories evolve, but the rot remains the same. The police eventually find surveillance footage. It shows Cole walking behind a bank at 1:10 in the morning, with Jeremy Carpenter trailing right behind him. So much for the story of him running off alone. Jeremy was there. Jeremy was watching. And yet, the silence in this case is deafening. They have digital breadcrumbs. Phone data that shows movement patterns between Mount Olive and Benson. A map of betrayal drawn in lines of latitude and longitude. They even find out that Cole's phone was not left in the car, as the suspects claimed. They had it. They were holding on to it, perhaps trying to crack it, perhaps trying to erase the evidence of their own existence. They were all playing a game of chicken, and Cole was the one who paid the ultimate price. They argue over who was double-crossing whom, over whether drugs were tossed out a car window, over who was scared of the police, and who was scared of the men they were dealing with. It is a pathetic tapestry of cowardice. The private investigator, David, gets threatened because he starts peeling back the layers. He realizes that there's another player in this shadow play, a man they call Gordo. The stories shift again. They say they caught up to Cole, that they hit him with a baseball bat, that they put him in a car. Every version of the story is designed to minimize the teller's guilt while maximizing the horror. What happened to that boy? That is the question that haunts the empty spaces in this investigation. His parents took out bonds on the suspects, trying to squeeze the truth out of them like a sponge, hoping that if they separated the sheep from the wolves, someone would finally speak. TJ gave them fragments, little crumbs of guilt, but never the whole loaf. They are protecting themselves. Even now, Jeremy Carpenter is gone. He died in 2024, taking whatever secrets he held about that night to the grave. The charges against the others were dropped, not because they were innocent, but to keep the path clear for a future homicide prosecution. They are still out there, living their lives, breathing the air that Cole can no longer breathe. It is a cold, hard fact of this business. You can run from the police, you can lie to the investigators, and you can hide behind your own cowardice. But the truth has a way of waiting for you. It does not go anywhere. It just waits. And eventually, the data will do the talking. Somebody knows where Cole is, and I promise you, they will not sleep easy until they tell us. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most trivial, pathetic reasons you could ever imagine. They build lives, they harbor dreams, and then, in a blink of an eye, Some coward decides that someone else's life is merely a pawn in their own miserable game. I tell you, it never ceases to amaze me how deep the darkness hides behind a pair of human eyes. My, you have to be kidding me. We are talking about the case of Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man who did not vanish into the night alone, but was erased by the people standing right beside him. Christopher was 22 years old. He was a bright kid, a salutatorian, a young man with a future and a desire to learn a trade, someone who walked away from the University of Florida to earn an honest wage. He found himself on a work site in Minnesota, and that is where he met the men who would become his undoing, Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter. These were not his friends. They were, at best, acquaintances of convenience. And on that Thanksgiving weekend in 2016, they brought him on a trip that was never about a holiday visit. It was about a drug deal. They claimed they were traveling to Benson, North Carolina, but the truth, as it always does, began to bleed through their pathetic excuses. Their initial story? That Cole just panicked, jumped out of the car, and sprinted into the void. They left him behind in the pitch black of a town he did not know. They did not call his parents. They did not search for him in any meaningful way. They simply went back to their lives. I tell you, that is not friendship. That is a survival instinct driven by the cold, hard reality of a crime gone wrong. When you look at the evidence, the logic simply collapses. You see, these men were not just passing through. They were there to acquire meth. They met up with Rodolfo de Leon Jr., known as Rudy, and Anthony James Jr., known as TJ, in a different town called Mount Olive. The story starts to shift once the police stop being polite. Suddenly, it was about a paranoia they claimed Cole felt. Suddenly, it was about a drug deal that went south. And why would a young man like Cole, who had his eyes on a career in medicine, suddenly be the center of this hurricane? Because he was the driver. Because he was the one who could not keep his mouth shut when the plan started to dissolve. The surveillance footage is the silent witness that never lies. It shows Cole, Jeremy, and Julian at a store, appearing perfectly calm. But hours later, footage from a Walgreens shows a very different story. It shows Cole walking, and Jeremy Carpenter trailing him like a shadow. It proves they were lying from the start. They were together. And then the silence takes over. They claim Cole wandered off, that they heard a car door, maybe gunshots. They played the role of the confused bystander. But they had Cole's phone in their possession long after he went missing. You do not keep a missing man's phone unless you are terrified of what that phone might reveal. The theory that emerges is as cold as it gets. P.I. David Marshburn uncovered a network of lies. A group of people who may have been trying to double-cross one another. Perhaps it was a play to steal back the drugs they were selling. Or perhaps Cole realized he was in a nest of vipers, and his knowledge of Spanish allowed him to understand exactly what was being plotted against him. Maybe he was fighting back. When you are 22 years old, and you realize that you are in a situation where your life is on the line, you do not just run into the night. You look for a way out. The sad reality is that these men were part of a web. There was talk of a man named Gordo, who was allegedly tasked with tracking Cole down. There are versions of stories involving baseball bats and threats with firearms. And yet, when the law moves and the walls of silence go up, these individuals are scared not of the truth, but of what the truth will do to their own hides. Cole's parents, Chris and Kathy, did what no parent should ever have to do. They became the investigators. They moved to North Carolina. They lived in a trailer. They fought for every scrap of information, while the people responsible for their sons' disappearance played a game of musical chairs with the truth. They even went as far as to bail one of the suspects out, hoping that removing him from the influence of the others would finally make him talk. And for a moment, it almost worked. But the world is a cruel place, and the answers remain just out of reach. Now, Jeremy Carpenter is gone, having passed away in 2024. The rest of them serve their time or hide in the shadows, waiting for the statute of limitations or the fading of memory to save them. But the truth does not fade. It sits in the data, in the phone records, in the empty spaces where a young man's life should be. Someone knows exactly where Christopher Cole Thomas is. Someone knows why a bright young man had to die because of a bag of poison and a quote-unquote friend. And until that person speaks, the weight of that silence will continue to suffocate everything they touch. You have to be kidding me. How can you live with that? I look at this case, and I see the absolute failure of human decency. A young man was stolen, and the people responsible are still acting like they're the victims. It is a tragedy, plain and simple, and it is a debt that remains unpaid in the dark corners of North Carolina. It has been nearly a decade since that night, and the pain does not lessen. It just changes shape. The parents of Cole Thomas are still out there searching, still waiting for the call that brings them home. If you know something, you need to step forward. Because every day that passes, the wall of silence grows higher, and the chance to do the right thing slips further away. But make no mistake, the truth always has a way of finding the light. It is just a matter of time. And for some, time is the one thing they are running out of. Do you believe that the lack of physical evidence found in the car or the search locations is the primary reason this case has remained unsolved for so long? Or do you think it is purely the wall of silence maintained by the individuals involved? My people are strange creatures. They lie when the truth would be so much simpler, and they hide when they should be running toward the light. You look at a case like this, and you realize that some people think they're the smartest guys in the room, but in reality, they are just digging a hole deeper and deeper until the dirt finally buries them. This is the story of Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man who did not just vanish into thin air. He was erased by the cowardice of those around him. I tell you, you have to be kidding me. Two men, Julian Vias Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter, walk into a police station in Benson, North Carolina, in the dead of the night on a cold Friday in November 2016. They are calm, collected, and ready to feed the officers a story that is as thin as cheap paper. They claim their friend, Cole, just hopped out of the car, panicked, and ran into the darkness. A young man, only 22 years old, away from home, in a town he does not know, suddenly decides to become a ghost? I have spent decades in this business, and I can tell you, the truth does not bend like that unless someone is breaking it on purpose. Cole was a smart kid, a salutatorian, a young man with his eyes set on medicine, motivated by a heart that cared for others. He was not a criminal. He was a kid who took a detour, a temporary shift in his path to earn some money. But when you walk into the world of people who trade in poison, you lose the luxury of being a bystander. Julian and Jeremy were not driving across state lines to visit family for the holiday. They were there to buy methamphetamine, and when the deal went sideways, they needed a fall guy. They needed someone to point the finger at when the heat started to rise. You see, the human heart is a dark place when it is fueled by fear and greed. These men treated Cole like a pawn. They watched him struggle. They watched him realize he was in over his head, and instead of helping him, they silenced him. They lied to the police, they lied to his parents, and they lied to themselves. They sat there, waiting for the world to move on, hoping that if they kept their mouths shut, the nightmare would just evaporate. But they forgot one thing. I am still looking. Look at the evidence. The surveillance footage shows Cole walking, and there is Jeremy, following him. Not a panicked run, but a controlled movement. They were not lost. They were being shepherded. And that phone? They kept his phone for days. Why? To check if they could break the encryption. To keep the digital trail from pointing directly to their own doors. It is pathetic. It is the hallmark of a guilty mind. They thought they were being clever, but they were just leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for any investigator with half a brain to follow. It makes me wonder about the nature of humanity. How do you look at a mother and a father, knowing you have robbed them of their child, and still sleep at night? You cannot. You only pretend. You bury the guilt, you build a fortress of lies, and you wait. But the truth has a funny way of surfacing. It is like a body in the water. It always comes back up to the top. The private investigator, David Marshburn, he understood that. He had to walk through the fire to get answers, facing threats and intimidation, because that is what it takes when you are hunting monsters who hide in plain sight. The tragedy is not just that Cole is gone. It is that the people who knew what happened chose their own comfort over a young man's life. Even when TJ, another man connected to this web, began to break down, even when the mother of that poor boy sat across from him and begged for the truth, he only gave them fragments, pieces of a puzzle he was too afraid to complete. They all served time. They all walked away at some point. And yet, the one thing that matters, the location of Christopher Cole Thomas, remains a secret kept by men who have nothing left but their own decaying consciences. Now, Jeremy Carpenter is dead. He took his secrets to the grave, just like a coward would. But the others, they are still out there. They are living their lives, drinking their coffee, and pretending that the shadow of that night in November does not follow them everywhere they go. But they know exactly where Cole is. And one day, the pressure will be too much. One day, someone will decide that saving their own soul is more important than protecting their silence. Until then, we wait, we watch, and we remember that in this life, you cannot run from the truth forever. It always catches up to you. My, what a waste of a life, and what a heavy burden to carry for the rest of yours. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most pathetic, shallow reasons you could ever imagine. They build a life, they have dreams, they have a future, and then, in the blink of an eye, some spineless coward decides that person is worth less than a bag of poison. My, you have to be kidding me. I tell you, when I look at a case like this, I do not see a complex mystery. I see a group of individuals who thought they were clever, who thought they could outrun the truth. But they were just playing a game of chicken with their own morality, and they lost. This is the story of Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man, only 22 years old, a salutatorian, a kid who wanted to get into medicine, someone who was driven. He was not a criminal, not by nature. He was just a young man trying to find his way, taking a job in Minnesota, thinking it was just a temporary detour. But sometimes life does not give you a detour. It drives you off a cliff. He ends up in a car with Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter. These were not his brothers. They were not his best friends. They were just people he worked with, and they were not heading home for Thanksgiving to eat turkey with their families. They were heading to North Carolina to buy methamphetamine. Think about that. A young man, entirely out of his element, dragged into a world of shadow and lies because he needed a ride or just wanted to pass the time. And these two geniuses, Julian and Jeremy, they think they can just stroll into a drug deal with a stranger in the passenger seat, and everything will be just fine when the deal goes sideways, and it always goes sideways. It is a law of nature. They start spinning a web of lies that would make a spider dizzy. They tell the police in Benson, North Carolina, that Cole just panicked, jumped out of the car, and vanished into the night. They wanted the world to think he just walked away from his life. But you and I know better. The truth has a way of leaking out, usually through the cracks in a liar's story. They said he ran off, yet they did not call his family. They did not alert his parents in Florida. They went back to work as if nothing happened. That is not the behavior of a friend. That is a behavior of someone who knows exactly where the body is buried. And then there is the phone data. They had his phone. They kept his phone. Why? Because they were hoping to manipulate it, to get inside it, to hide the digital trail of their own incompetence. It is pathetic. Then you have the surveillance footage. 300 seconds of video that shattered their entire fairy tale. Captain Greg Percy, now the chief, he was sitting at his kitchen table, night after night, grinding his way through hours of footage, and he found it. Cole was walking, and right behind him, like a shadow, was Jeremy Carpenter. They lied about the walk. They lied about him being alone. They lied about everything. Then they start feeding the police these breadcrumbs, claims about praying at a church, claims about hearing gunshots, claims about needing water. It is a carousel of deceit. They were not scared of the dark. They were scared of the consequences. I look at the parents, Chris and Kathy. My heart goes out to them. They did not wait for the bureaucracy to turn the gears. They took their own trailer. They drove to North Carolina. They put up the signs. They searched the ditches. They were parents on a mission, and they had more dignity in their little finger than those 4 suspects had in their entire bodies. They even went so far as to bond out Anthony James Jr., trying to separate him from the pack, hoping that if he were alone, if he were away from the others, his conscience might finally wake up. They gave him a chance to do the right thing, and he gave them fragments. He gave them pieces, but never the whole picture. This is what happens when you prioritize a drug habit over human life. You become nothing. You become a shell. You spend your days lying to investigators, lying to families, and eventually you lose your own life, like Jeremy Carpenter did in 2024, taking the truth to the grave with him. But I am here to tell you, the truth is not buried deep enough. Someone knows where Cole is. Someone knows exactly how this ended, and they are keeping it in their dark little corner of the world. But justice is a patient hunter. It does not sleep, it does not tire, and eventually it catches up to every single one of them. If you know what happened to Christopher Cole Thomas, if you have a shred of humanity left in you, you need to speak up, because silence is just a confession you haven't admitted to yet. Human beings are peculiar creatures. They kill for the most pathetic reasons imaginable: greed, fear, a simple miscalculation that spirals into a tragedy they are too cowardly to own. You look at a case like this, and you realize that the most dangerous place a man can ever be is in the passenger seat of a car, driven by someone who has everything to lose and no soul to spare. I tell you, it is a cold, calculated game, and the people playing it are as shallow as a puddle in a drought. We are looking at the story of Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man, barely 22 years old, with his whole life ahead of him, a young man who had the foresight to be a salutatorian and the ambition to aim for medicine. He was not a criminal. He was just a kid looking to earn a little extra cash on a construction contract in Minnesota. Someone who made the fatal mistake of trusting the wrong people for a ride home. The arrogance of youth, thinking you can just dip your toe into a darker current and not be swept away. On that night in November 2016, Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter painted a picture for the police in Benson, North Carolina. They spun a yarn about Cole acting paranoid, jumping out of a car, and vanishing into the black of the night. It is a story designed to sound like a man suffering a mental break, a story designed to make the police shrug their shoulders and move on to the next call. But you and I, we know better. When stories start bending like a willow in a hurricane, it is never confusion. It is a lie. A bold-faced, pathetic lie meant to cover a crime that they thought would stay buried in the dark. I look at the parents, Chris and Kathy, and my heart breaks for them. They had to hunt for the truth themselves because the so-called friends, the people who were supposed to be watching out for their son, were too busy trying to save their own hides. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To be told your son ran off into the unknown, while his companions cannot even bother to pick up a phone and call you. You have to be kidding me. That is not friendship. That is complicity. As we peel back the layers, you see the rot. They were not passing through for Thanksgiving. They were down there to buy methamphetamine. They were playing with fire, and when the deal turned sour, when the drugs went missing, tossed out a window, or stashed by a snake in the group, they needed a scapegoat. And who better than the kid who did not belong? The kid who, perhaps, understood just enough Spanish to realize that the conversation in that car had shifted from commerce to a death sentence. The surveillance footage is a silent witness that never lies. 1 minute and 10 seconds after midnight, you see it, Cole walking, and Jeremy Carpenter following right behind him. It proves they were lying from the first moment they opened their mouths. And then there's the phone data. That digital trail is a relentless tracker, showing their movements, showing them all congregating, showing them trying to access a phone that no longer belonged to a living man. It is a tragedy of errors. They were desperate, they were terrified, and they were, above all else, guilty. They treated a human life like a loose end in a ledger. They played their games. They dropped their breadcrumbs. They lawyered up and they clammed up. They think that because they kept their mouths shut, they have won. But they forget one thing. The truth has a way of breathing, even under the weight of a decade of silence. Somebody knows where Cole is. Someone knows exactly where they took that boy, and they are sitting on that information, rotting away in their own skin. I have seen it 1,000 times. The walls start closing in, the conscience starts eating away at the mind, and the weakest link finally snaps. It is time for someone to do the only honorable thing left in this pathetic affair and speak up. Because I guarantee you, the shadows in North Carolina are not as thick as these people think. You can hide a body, you can hide a motive, but you can never truly hide the truth. It is sitting there, waiting, and eventually it will come to light. I tell you, this case is far from closed. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most trivial, pathetic reasons you could ever imagine. My. You see, murder usually happens in the heat of a moment, but sometimes it happens in the cold, calculated silence of people who think they are smarter than the law. I tell you, this case of Christopher Cole Thomas, or Cole, as he was known, is one that will haunt you. It is a story of a young man, barely 22 years old, who vanished into the dark, and the people who were supposed to be his friends, who instead chose to weave a tapestry of lies so thin you could see right through it. You have to be kidding me. Cole was a smart kid, a salutatorian, a young man with a future in medicine, and a heart set on helping his brother. He was just looking for a bit of experience, a way to earn some cash during a break from school. He takes a job, finds himself in a crew of guys he barely knows, and suddenly he is on a cross-country trip to North Carolina. And for what? Not for a Thanksgiving dinner with family. They went there to buy meth. The stupidity of it is staggering. They thought they were playing a game of shadows, but they were playing with fire. And in the early hours of that cold Black Friday in 2016, in the quiet town of Benson, the fire consumed the only person who had any real potential for a future. I look at the actions of Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter, and I see nothing but the desperate, frantic maneuvering of cowards. They stood there in the police parking lot, hours after their friend had supposedly run into the night, spinning a yarn about mental health struggles, about paranoia, about a young man who just decided to disappear. They were not panicked. They were rehearsed. And when the police failed to see the rot in their story, they just went back to work. They left him. They did not call his family. They did not search for him. They went home. It makes my skin crawl. The investigation was a masterclass in obfuscation. Every time the truth threatened to surface, these individuals just dropped another breadcrumb, another layer of deception. First, it was a random flight of fancy into the woods. Then, it was a drug deal gone wrong. Then, it was Jeremy following Cole to a church to pray, as if heaven would look kindly on someone who just watched a man vanish. It is a pathetic attempt to shift the blame onto the victim, to paint a smart, ambitious young man as someone who simply lost his mind. I have seen this before. It is the hallmark of someone who knows exactly where the body is, or at least, who helped put it where it lies. The digital trail was the final nail. The phones told a story that their mouths never could. They followed the path of their movements, the strange looping roads, the persistent silence of their devices, and the chilling realization that even after Cole was gone, they were holding his phone, trying to access it trying to bury the digital evidence of their crime. They were not searching for him. They were trying to sanitize their own history. And then there is the matter of the other players. Rudy, TJ, the mysterious Gordo, a network of people who knew, who watched, and who stayed silent. Cole's parents, Chris and Kathy, they're the ones who bear the true burden. They did the work the law could not do, chasing shadows, enduring threats, and even bonding out the very people they suspected had a hand in their son's disappearance, all in the desperate hope of finding a crack in the wall of silence. They were searching for a flicker of humanity in a void. It is a tragedy that is still unfolding. No one has spoken the full truth. No one has shown the location of his resting place. But here is the thing about secrets. They are heavy, and eventually they become too heavy to carry. Someone knows where Cole is, and while they sit in their silence, thinking they have won, they are just waiting for the day that the evidence, the data, and the conscience of the guilty finally force them to speak. My, the truth is coming. It always does. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most pathetic, flimsy reasons you can ever imagine. You spend your life looking into the abyss, and after a while, you realize the abyss isn't filled with monsters. It is filled with cowards who are simply too terrified to tell the truth. My, you have to be kidding me. Today we are talking about Christopher Cole Thomas, a 22-year-old young man with a life full of promise, a kid who wanted to work hard, save money, and eventually enter the medical field to help others. He was the kind of person who should have had a long, bright future ahead of him. Instead, on a cold night in November 2016, he simply vanished. I tell you, there is nothing more gut-wrenching than a parent forced to become an investigator because the people who were supposed to be watching out for their son decided that their own skins were more important than his life. Cole was working a contract job in Minnesota. He was a long way from his home in Florida, and he ended up in the small town of Benson, North Carolina, with two guys he barely knew, Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter. They claimed they were just passing through. They claimed Cole panicked, jumped out of the car, and ran into the dark. If you believe that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn I would like to sell you. When you have a group of people who cannot keep their stories straight, you are not looking at confusion. You're looking at a calculated, desperate lie. These two men, along with two others named Rodolfo de Leon Jr. and Anthony James Jr., dragged the truth through the mud. They were not there for Thanksgiving dinner. They were there for a drug deal, a meet that went sideways in the worst way imaginable. We're talking about greed, about petty people playing with fire, and in the end, it was a young man with a bright mind who paid the ultimate price for being in the wrong place with the wrong people. The parents, Chris and Kathy, did what any parent would do. They refused to let their son disappear into the void. They drove hundreds of miles. They set up camp, they put up signs, and they demanded answers. They looked into the eyes of these suspects. They pleaded with them. They even took the extraordinary step of posting bond for one of them just to try and pry a shred of truth out of their mouths. It is a testament to the human spirit that they kept going, even when the walls of silence seemed impenetrable. We have cell phone data and surveillance footage that proves these men were lying from the very first moment they walked into that police department. We see them on camera walking in the night, a trail of breadcrumbs that leads nowhere because someone decided to keep a secret. We have people like the individual known as Gordo, who pops up in the shadows of this investigation, talking about threats and baseball bats and forced transport. It is cowardly. It is contemptible. You see, in my line of work, you learn one thing very quickly. The truth always has a way of rising to the surface, even if it takes years. These men serve time for concealment and obstruction. They dance around the questions, and they tried to bear the reality of what they did. But memory does not fade for the people who love Cole. The evidence is there, hidden in the digital footprints and the gaps in their stories. Someone out there knows exactly where Christopher Cole Thomas is. They have been hiding behind silence. thinking that if they just stay quiet long enough, the world will forget. But the world does not forget, and I do not forget. It is time for someone to stop being a coward and start being a human being. The clock is ticking, and the truth has a funny way of making sure the right people get caught in the end. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most idiotic reasons you could ever imagine. You have to be kidding me. I have spent my life looking into the eyes of men who think they are clever, who think they can outrun the truth. But the truth has a funny way of catching up. It always does. Today, we are talking about Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man, barely into his 20s, with a life ahead of him that was cut short, not by some grand master criminal, but by a bunch of cowards who were too busy playing games with their own lives to care about his. I tell you, it makes my blood boil. Cole was a bright kid. He was a salutatorian of his high school, a young man who had the grit to take a break from college to work, to get his hands dirty, and to learn what it means to earn a living. He was an apprentice, a kid just trying to make his way, but he fell in with the wrong crowd. Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter. Two names that will forever be linked to a tragedy that should never have happened. They claim they were traveling from Minnesota back to their roots for the holiday. But that is a lie. A bold-faced, pathetic lie. They were not there for turkey. They were there for methamphetamine. It is just after 3 a.m. on Black Friday in 2016. A quiet, cold morning in Benson, North Carolina. Two men walk into a police station, and they look entirely too calm for men who have supposedly just lost their friend in the middle of the night. Their story? It is a masterpiece of deception. They say Cole, this young man who has never even been to this town before, just started acting paranoid, snatched the keys, jumped out of the car, and sprinted into the darkness. Do you believe that? Because I certainly do not. You have to be kidding me. A man does not just vanish into the void without a reason. The parents, Chris and Kathy, they were living every parent's worst nightmare. They did not even know their son was in North Carolina. They were in Florida, expecting a phone call about the holidays, and instead, they got a call from the police that their son was missing. It is heart-wrenching. They did not sit around waiting for someone else to do the work. They drove. They went to the scene of the crime. They put up signs. They combed through ditches. They did what the law should have done from the start. They were searching for a flicker of light in a pitch-black situation. Then there is the matter of the digital trail. These fools thought they could hide behind lies, but they forgot about the machines. They had Cole's phone. They had it the whole time, and they did not say a word. When the police and a determined private investigator finally started looking at the data, the whole story started to unravel like a cheap suit. They were in Mount Olive. They were at a convenience store, and the timeline shows they were not just traveling. They were moving with intent. There's a piece of surveillance footage from a Walgreens that shows Cole walking, and there is someone behind him. Jeremy Carpenter. He is not attacking him, not yet, but he is there, trailing him like a shadow. That one moment of footage proves that every word out of their mouths up until that point was a calculated deception. They were trying to manufacture a narrative that Cole simply wandered off. But the reality is much darker. Theories started to emerge. Was it double cross? Was Julian Valles trying to play both sides, selling drugs and stealing them back? It is entirely possible. These men live in a world where loyalty is a foreign language. They deal in misery. And when things go wrong, when the drugs are missing or someone gets wise to the game, they do not look for solutions. They look for someone to blame. And Cole, being the outsider, the kid who was just driving the car, became the perfect target. They say he might have known Spanish. They say he might have overheard them plotting. If that is true, then his panic was not paranoia. It was a realization of his own mortality. He was a smart kid, and he knew when the air in the room changed. He knew he was in a cage with wolves. We had 4 men under the microscope: Julian Valles, Jeremy Carpenter, Rudolfo De Leon. and Anthony James. They were all involved in the cover-up. They were all part of the obstruction. And yet they stayed silent. They played their little games. They lied to the parents. They lied to the police. And they left the family in agony. TJ, one of the group, was even bonded out by the very father whose son he likely helped disappear. Imagine the courage it takes for a father to do that, to stare down the person who holds the secrets to his son's fate, all for the sake of finding the truth. He spoke to TJ. He pleaded with him. He begged for answers, and he got fragments, pieces of a puzzle that they refused to complete. Now, Jeremy Carpenter is gone. He passed away in 2024. He took his secrets to the grave, and with him went the definitive answer to the question that haunts that family every single day. Where's Cole? My, the arrogance of these men is astounding. They think that because they have kept their mouths shut, they have won, but they haven't. They have only ensured that they will carry the weight of this for the rest of their miserable lives. Someone out there knows. Someone knows exactly where he is. Someone knows where they buried the truth. And I tell you this, the truth does not rot. It waits. And eventually, someone will talk. They always do. Until then, we keep asking. We keep digging. Because no one deserves to be forgotten, and no one deserves to get away with murder. I tell you, justice may be slow, but it is relentless. And I, for one, will be watching.